lukaMandela nene iinguqulelo ezibalaseleyo. Ukubonisa bemchiza. Inhangekenai nesayensi uGqr. Roberts langer is dit met injingel wazi wesiku kenaya. Nomseki we moderna. David Ferguson 1 Robert langer 2. University 1 Howard die 2 Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Papa se winge 10 Junie goed 2023. Doi eps doi org 10.2142835 is 66 027 Lisensie Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No-Derivatives 4.0 International License Spijnsend 4.0
Inu Chemist I Janali Yismfundo Inu Chemist Academic
Jenali vol 1 is Sicilielo 1. Udliwano-ndlebe nene iinguqulelo ezibalaseleyo kwisiXhosa. Podcast gemist en saad udliwano-ndlebe noDavid Josia Ferguson immers kenye noGqr. Langer met institute in jingel wazi kenye nomseki we moderna. David Josia Ferguson. CFIATSA bekele. Entwend wil waMhobe. Robert Langer. Inkosin gukende di banisa namlanje. Kwai kele ikifakiwe. Gukifetsane nye undiza kifovinela abapelapile bammalanga nave. Robert Samuel Langer hier engineele eie chemikali asemelika isazenzili isomasesini imkambi ukwaien geliksa in jingal wazi vesikule labate Massachusetts Institute of Technology. David Josia Ferguson. In jingal wazi vesobinjinele biokemikali kenye biomedical ilala esebenza kwisiebe lesobinjinele bemchiza. Kenye nesebe lobinjinele biological amit nae ilingule fakultei Harvard kenye nemet einkubo jalte sciences kenye ne technologie kenye ne Koch Institute for Integratieve Kankerresearch. David Josia Ferguson. Ngo 2015 Robert Langer wawongwan gebaso lika Queen Elizabeth lobinjinele. Inizininzi amawonga kenye nempimelelo. De biografie in Vetsane. Robert Langer inkomnaye wienjingal wazi se 9 institute met Ikuban genjingal wazi wisiku lelona wonga lepezuli linukinekeselwa kwelingu le faculty. Langer ibale amankaki angapizikui 1570. Ikwanazo namalingelo avudwa umenzi vechiza angapizilukui 1,400 aketsivio nasalendeleo kwe labate yikelele. Amalingelo avudwa umenzi vechiza kachter amaeza ekemikali biotechnologie kenye nien kampani zezechubu zonayango. Ingoena engineeli ekankanai viau imbalit indik 309 energiekatselwa isingapizulukwe 386,000 gokwe google stolar. Isebenze njengelingi lebodi sciency aukitaya kenye nederigs United States iona bodi epizuli gebisu efta ikisikaan ko 1995 2002 kwae njengusilalo vio ikisika kui 1999 2002. Langer ifimene eimbasa isingapizulukwama 220. Inkomnaye wabanti aba 3 abapelayo abafimene United States siswe imbasa sciency 2006 kenye United States siswe imbasa technologie kenye nensa 2011. Kwakona Wafimana 1996 Gardner Foundation International Award 2002 Charles 2.
Inu chemist I Janali Yizmfundo Inu chemist academic.
Yenali vol 1 is Isilelo 1. Udliwano-ndlebe nene ayenkukele izibalaseleyo kwimichiza. Istar draper prise etaat van Yengelingana nebasu lenubal leenjinelik ebasu le millennium lika 2008 Ilona basu lekele leteknologie emelabenet imbasa e priestleika 2012 Ilona basu lepezulu le American chemical sotiteit ebasu le wolf lika 2013 kwekemistry ebasu lukaPandela lika 2014 kwesi zubomikene nebasu lasekautu lovama 2014. Ngo 2015 Xhosa langer Wafimana ibasu lika kien Elizabeth lobenjinele. Pakati kwamane amanenzi amabasu awafimene ilanger libasu likadekson lenzulul wasi 2002 imbasa eins obit webesep ikukosu kenai nenkesu 2003 ibasu laarvei 2003 imbasa kayon Fritz 2003 enekwan gapambili abakambi abanyalo. Nyengo Thomas Edison no orville wricht General Motors Kettering prise voor kankerresearch 2004 Dan David prise koeimateriaal skiense 2005 Albany Medical Centre prise koeimedicine kenai nopandulwe biomedical 2005 basu elekilukinazo zonke is opandulwe zonango ikengeniswa national inventors hall of fame 2006 Makplan Research Award 2008 Prince of Asturias Award opandulwe zobegisa kenai science 2008 Warren Alpert Foundation Prise 2011 Trimo International Ebasu 2012 Medalika Benjamin Franklin Kwisiansi Aibomi 2016 Ebasu Leka Biller Kwinanosinse Kenai Nanomedicine 2017 Ebasu Ledriefus Kwisiansi Emechiza 2019 Mbasa Science Ilona Wonga Lipa Cameleo Lase Portugal Ngo 2020 Mbasa Kamarise Mari Janot 2020 IBFA Foundation Frontiers of Knowledge Award Biologie Kenai Nebiomedicine 2021 Kenai Nebasu le Balzan le Biomateriaals Nanomedicine Kenai Netisi Engineering 2022 Ngo 1998 Wafimana ebasu le lemelson met Ilona basu le kilo le labati lukailwan gukiba nkomneiva basen gulibezonango abadimilio kumbali. Ngo 1989 Ichter. Langer woneilwa National Academy of Medicine Ngo 1992 woneilwa National Academy of Engineering National Academy of Sciences Wazan Ngo 2012 woneilwa National Academy of Inventors. Forbes Magazine 1999 Kenai Bioworld 1990 Zibize Ichter. Langer nyengomneye wabanti abangama 25 ababalulekileo kwi biotechnologie kwe labati. Idislufer Magazine 2002 Xhosa nyengomneye wabanti ababalulekileo abangama 20 kilendavo. Forbes Magazine 2002 Ekete Ichter. Langer nyengomneye wabasen fili bezintu izensa. Abali 15 kwe labati yikelela abaza kependa bakulinke ikamfa leti. Itime Magazine kenai neken 2001 ikambe it langer nyengomneye wabanti ababalileke kakile kwi 100 imilika kenai nomneye wabanti abapezulube 18 kwisiansi ukanai kwiesa. Imilika Amerikas best. Die parade magazine 2004 ek het Xhosa langer nyeng om na we 6 amakawe op hande olinukisindisa ibome bako. Langer ifimene izidanga zoBGqra izingoma 40. Zikika izidanga izifela kui university asa Harvard isinai stoel of. Meditine University Asiale University Ase Columbia Isekembuzu Sloan Kettering Kanker Centre Gerstner Graduate School Universiteit of Maryland Universiteit of Western Ontario Canada ETH Switzerland Itechnion Israël University Bere Asia Jerusalem Israël University Ase Katholike de Louvain Belgium Irenselaar Polytechnic Institute University Ase Willamette University Ase Liverpool Enilani College Ase Baptist University Ase Nottingham Enilani Die Albany Medical College University Ase Pennsylvania State University Ase Northwestern University Ase Uppsala Sweden University Ase Tel Aviv Israel University Ase Boston University Ase Ben Gurion Israel University Ase Laval Canada University Ase Carnegie Mellon University Ase Drexel Yanang University South Korea University Ase South Wales Australia Karolinska Institutet Sweden Hong Kong Universiteit of Skiense aan Technologie Hong Kong en National Institute of Astrophysics Optics and Electronics in Mexico University of Limerick Ireland University 3
Inu chemist I janali yismfundo Inu chemist academic.
Yenali vol 1 is isilelo 1. Udliwano-ndlebe nene iinguqulelo isibalaseleyo kwimichiza. Of Illinois Uyu State Universiteit, Willen College of Engineering, Alfred Universiteit, Mackay Universiteit of Skiense aan Technologie Universidad de Santiago de Compostela Universiteit Maastricht, Kunye Universiteit of California, San Francisco Middle. Wafimana Isidanga Sake se Bachelor University Ase Cornell Ngu 1970 Kunye Nes, Sake. Ikusika Massachusetts Institute of Technology Ngu 1974 Sombini Chemical Engineering. David Josia Ferguson. Kulingile Gqirha langer en kose kakilun Gukizemana namlanje. Kule Ikuba Nava Appa. Robert Langer. Yonwabela. David Josia Ferguson. Eva. Lilepeke Elena Lavona Matabiso Alenchidu Ueye Vavafimana. Robert Langer. Eva Indingatsu Ikiba Yazi Akakungshibisu Ngaku en Gimzikoloniet Yazi Iuda Volkman Vaingimtebisivam Ukubhiyozela Kwaye Vaile Lobu Lomti Okulalva Ikiba Nantuni na Enokwenzeka. Andazi Ikiba waseMzantsi Lua Maswi Kodwa Wapela Oku Yazi Kwaye Kenditinga Ikiba Ikiba Nantuni na Enokwenzeka. Kwaye ndisinga ikikapela ksa ichingan kholo lobu kulala ifimana ikirtekwa. Kia kibaku imikobu eindliela kwaye inganekazeli. Kwaye ndiasinga iazi kendeteta iketi akazanga ateten kholo lobu kodwa lobu uventu indaifandayo kiaen yengums bisit ikupapa amapepa amakile kwaye inganekazeli. David Ferguson. Uwut elinge kakilu. Ikizinge sakibalilekila. Ke ingaba inalu nalepina ikibisu kwabo bafina ikilandela insimi usebenza kieunhuki. Robert Langer. Ewet lebendisandila ikiaitetaan die bone nyengingsalene eindgebisuk ayazi, Disinga ikiba kibalilekele ikwenza izinto ezigikulayo kwaye zinganesi kodwa ikonde ikiba ksa ienzile ia kidibana nimikobu eindlela kwaye kisiliela ngamane amaksesa. Robert Langer 4.
I knew chemist I janali yizmfundo I knew chemist academic.
Yenali vol 1 is Sicilielo 1. Udliwano-ndlebe nene iinguqulelo ezibalaseleyo kwimichiza. Kijk iazi eke into ibalilekileo kikiba nyenguku ibetsilu kikizingisa. Ikizingisa kibalileke kakilu. David vergezond. Iwe einanileo. Iazi langer in die mamele udliwano-ndlebe ulinensi kwaye inaya izintu izibalaseleyo kikiba ndlela aku izemfundo ikukusul vizemfundo walingelila. Iye vadibana niemengeni etile. Kwaye ndisinga ikiba kiantumeka kakili ikiba ekwazile ikizingisa kwaye ipimelele pakati kwalu mengeni. David vergezond. Kinguke hambelana nubekile baku katene ekete ibenjinele bemichiza nyengensimi ikia inkelu. Robert Langer Ndingatanda ikikikslela ikiba bekisingel wa kakule kodwa andinakiaiteta luentu iazi ekikalienik sa bendinga pakati. Kwisikulu samabanga apakamilieu itata kenai nomsubisi vambati ewe iazi ilungile kwisaense nakwisibalu nguku kifineka aba engineele. Robert Langer nguku ndaba engineele. Kwai iazi kwai xandandise corneel nyengesidanga sukikala kwesi ibendiaitanda iauenantu bendiaeu iauena shimestrai. Nguku ndaba engineele emishiza. Robert Langer Ndia fian denzile. Disinga ikiba ibengum sebenzi onkilu. David vergezond. Ewe. Namendingatsu. Kengo kwesifundu zaku zoBGqr ngaba kukwimigka ifanayu uaya vaketa ibenjinele bemichiza ikize ibune isifundu zoBGqr nguku. Ngaba ezu zintu izitata isakibutse zintu izike kapazilieu kwiminauka ayaku aisidanga sukikala. Robert Langer Kulingelet iazi exisa ilide ubendingen nau ngkamango ekashilieu eintu indifina ikienzan yengum van die wesebini. Nyenguku ndisitsu in de pimelele ibenjinele bemishizan gengsa ezizati in dizitetilieu nyengum van die opimeleleu. Robert Langer Ndeteta iketi ingenaye ndlela ibekikiki bekeka kwaluentu akwaba bendisafina intu indifina ikienza. Kwaiksan dandingum fundi unisidanga andabandakanaika nakwizinai izintu izinenzi, nyengukinkidisa ikikalisa isikulu. 5.
I knew chemist I janali yizmfundo I knew chemist academic.
Yenali vol 1 is Sicilielo 1. Kiba fundi bezikulu izipakamilieu aba lepekayu kenai nizintu izinyalu kwaye. Udliwano-ndlebe nene iinguqulelo ezibalaseleyo kwimichiza. Robert Langer Ikapalisa akarateilam insa chemistry nezibalu. Kwae ka akizanga kibe de kiben gimsebenzi vam waseMva KuBGqr apundie en dafumana isakukelu sopandu kwae uku kikiba isabidlele. Dasebenza kwisabidlele sabantwana nyenge posto kwae en gukwinene eindem kipela engineeli apu. Robert Langer Kwae nyenguku benditselu iuda volkman vaengumzikelu ubalase leo. Ndaza ndakalisa ikitangan gendlela en dan denuki sombililan gayu engsaki zonayangun gemfalapi benjinele bemishiza. David vergezond. Ewet ilingile kakilu. Etseluke ikiba isikalen yani isikulu. Ndekem bilan disifange. Isikol veni udliwano-ndlebe ulidlilileu. Njoku. Umbizo wamkiven gewukiba kwaketini kwae isikiben yani ikiba isikale esu sikulu. Robert Langer. Ewek enenenik nkuken yalu ke imdla wam wukifundisa wakalatsa en dandise kornel kiba en dandingem shidisi wukifundisa kwae en dietanda kakile luentu kwae ke Exandafrika a Boston kinaaka olandelayo kenae nekambret ge ikiuena imet nyenge imfundi onisidanga en dien dabanda kanaika ekwenzini imisibenzi aukifundisa arokpirai nase kambrete. Robert Langer. Kwae njuku kwakeko abanai abantu. Peter Hager teikenaen nel de Drexon. Paul Davies ite banomdla wukikalisa isikulu sabantwana. Abasebenzisa kwae bevielen gam babiza ikuba en Nceda Antoni. Akapalisini en kubu zezibalu nezenzulilwazi. Robert Langer. Kwae ndasinga ikiba okukifakala nyengentu ibalileke kakilu. Nding yalu. David vergezond. Ilinge kakilu luentuke iweginen yani imbonukenai nokisebenzisana kwendavu ukieu. In yani vena ikegina izu zintu kwendavu ayaku aukisebenzat ilabi ayaku. Izaginan yani izu zintu. Robert Langer. Ke indiake kelela apu bolikile. Mgombono indizama ikekitaza wonke imti uselebi ikuba asinga makile kwae apupa amapupa amakile kwae enze izintu izinuke tengetemba sibe nefete ilekelu kwempilo nakwentlalontle erbanti. 6.
Inu chemist I janali yismfundo inu chemist academic.
Yenali vol iend isisililo ien. Elabati. Udliwano-ndlebe nene ayenkukele izibalaseliau kwimichiza. Robert Langer. Kwae kek iazi malanga nomsebenzi wekela iazi, ndeketaza wonke imti ikiba asebenzisana. Iazi sinabanti abanenzi sinabanti abangapise kwe 100 elebu. Kodwaan diazama ikikesa. Diateta ukukifakalan gatike bidinge kodwaan dizama ikikesa abanti abale kakili abafanau kodwaan gebani. Robert Langer. Kwakona abafinan gokwenene ekwenza imaleku alabatini. Ailuen tuken dien dazama ikienzan gokependapendivieu. Njuku kendisinga ikiba zilingile. Ndeteta iketik abanti isinabu kwelebi aiti bebebalasiele. David vergezond. Iwe einani lieu. Kamalanga nempi melelu ayaku inditinga ikiba nawapi na umgangato wokilinga nisa, pamaswen gamaswe, wesiswe, nditinga ikiba abanti bonke banukifima ikiba ipi melele nyengfulend lela kwensimi. Ka eintoni onuketi iain kume kakili impi melelu ayaku nokiba kikikibisa nokiba kikinetveki nokiba kengokwako. David vergezond. Ndlela eukifunda ukanaya eukifundisa. Eintoni onuketi iben huyenam kibi ukanaya nkitazu uaya wapi melela. Robert Langer. Ewe in die asinga ikiban de pimelele kanga kanani kwae ukukisenukixokwa, kotwan gekomlinganisilo in die navo iazi inditinga ikiba ibengabantu. Dibe nabanti abale abamankalisau abasebenza elap kwae bebelingile. Robert Langer. Die tanda ikisinga ikiba bafakalalwa kikiban dien dabapata kakele nokiban dien dabakitaza ikiba bazama ikapila amapepa abu. Kodwa inenieni inabanti abanenzi kakilu yeazit imet. Ibentle en davu kwae siye sanentu nye inani ilekelu laba fundi abalinge kakilu kinae nie postdocs kolebi. Robert Langer. Kwae iazi nangawapi na imlinkanisilo iazi ndisinga ikiba abale 19 ngoku bakwiziku liseswe lubenjineli. Ndisinga ikiba 16 ikongeza kui akademie of meditine iazi kwae baie bafimana zonke entlobo amabaso kwae wakala en kampani. Diateta obaie bapimelela kakilu. 7.
Inu chemist I janali yismfundo inu chemist academic.
Yenali vol 1 isisilelo 1. Udliwano-ndlebe nene ayenkukele izibalaseleu kwemichiza. Robert Langer. Kekem ibekwana. David vergezond. Iwe aynani leo. Abanti babalileke kakilu. Nkukun gengsa ayazu zonke imbopelele kuzaku nizintu uzifizi lieu izabalazela nyani ikersina ukanae ikilonduluza ibumi ubelinge lele nyeo. Robert Langer. Iwe emfazi vam venza kakule kakili ekignise kisini ikiban denza nyalu. Iazi iksa abandfana bam baba banchinti kwandiktilela ikiba andihambi ikifineka ndibe sekayan finsembi aisekshente ruku ibesuki ikizen dikite eksesa nabandfana. Robert Langer. Kwa iksa andihamba indeteta ikiba ngukikiniseki lieu nguki andihambi. Kodwaksa andihamba ngukikiniseki lieu ksa abandfana baba banchinti indiateta iazi nasekaya andinakizen dihamba iksesa elide. Robert Langer. Iazi indien dafanda ikiba eilentu aibalilekele kubo. Kenyengo kwenza mzekelu imenaoka imelani ilandelelana kwa fineka ndie kwa siraili intu ifana nisifundu ukanaye ibasu ukanaye isidanga sembeko. Robert Langer. Kwae onke lue maxisa amalani nkukilandelelana imenaoka imelani ialekeneu andizangen disebenzise iutiele. Iazi indisanda kibhaba. Ndachita enksalenai ausiki apu ndaza ndababa ndabiela apu. Ingeluk sesa kwakaku invelemua isika etel afif isia enev. Eork ingukundie ndakwazi ikienza luentua. Robert Langer. Kodwa opofu kwakin yaluen dandenga suzen die hamba iksesa elide. David vergezond. Konke kilingile. Iwe insapu eintu ibalileke kakilu. Suendingatsu iti ifamilei aku isisisiku ukwazileu ikachina ibumi ubelinge leleneo. Robert Langer. Iwe luentu kwae inkusikazi am ibilingele kakilu ulaura. Indixilela into Aitsinghаю. Ikiba bendino kwenza okatilet ikiba bendichita exesa ilinenzin disenza izinae izintu nkukikinisilieu ibaya kendazisa. 8.
Inu chemist I janali yismfundo inu chemist academic.
Yenali vol 1 is isilelo 1. Udliwano-ndlebe nene eienkukele isibalaseleyo kwemichiza. David vir gesond. Uwit elingile luen token gokwempembelelo zaku nyengayet evet inuketi aipi, yauna mibuenu layo inempembelelo kenai nesebenzayo ikiza keti gaan goki. Robert Langer. Ewe indisinga ikiba kuku endavu izentati ukanae izine ekenzima ikiba iazi, izie zabalilekila. Ndisinga ikiba omne ieye waba sebenzi isavenza nuyuda volkman ekulikanisini angiogenesis inhibitors aukikala bloedvessel inhibitors aukikala iazi kwae ukukekokelele kinenzi nenza sebenzi uwenziven gabanaya. Robert Langer. Emfa kukuk en kampani kunaye nukunaye amachiza amanenzi amatsa anukiba linsidu ikinangeni imalaza kunaye nesifu zamalo. Okwisibini malavambingvim sebenzi vizintu izentsa kunaye nukanyiswa kwisi ubisi izilavel vayu nazu kwae iazi izibandakanaya inanwe teknologai. Robert Langer. Kwae ukukekokelele ekibini iaziet inani liemverliesuen gamakula alekeneu kwakona. Kwae ekigkibeleni ia kiban gembono. Waluentun gombono wo benjinele bezikubu. Iazazi isile kwae iaziet senza apu inukidibanisa izekrobu kunae izikubi kunae namalingu. Amatsa nukiba lilingi ilikwichip ukanaye izikubi izetsa zimbini nyengulise lokwenziva. David vir gesond. Kulengile. Ken gokukifimana kunaye nukifina indavu efanelikileo ikize ipi melelen gokwesaensi nanku bekrele krele. Ihamban yanin gokifimana oku. Sasitini kwae sasitini isakuakulu saku ukanaye ai entuni iribriki aku ukanaye isiseku usifimiene kisu Yesu sinkongeliao. David vir gesond. Ndi tata ikiba aimet. Kodwa iefimienen jani luentu. Robert Langer. Ewe kilingele indiateta kekeko endlela ezalekeneu indeteta ikiba penkenyene disinga ikiba amafa indinavu kwabantwana. Isabet lele uku kwakibalile kilen gokwenene. Kwaeke met indiateta yawazi oku indiakikelelat et hamsanka indinalu kodwa denzan yalu. Azi ikiba bandikasile kwae iazit izintu zasebenzapaya. Robert Langer. 9.
Inu chemist janali yismfundo inu chemist academic.
Yenali vol 1 is isilelo 1. Udliwano-ndlebe nene eienkukele isibalaseleyo kwemichiza. Ikigkibelene nangwana kinyalut idala indavu akun gokwenayani. Sa ikuba ilabit ayeu iazi aimikubima wenzela abanaya. Iazi oku kikiba kwenza imaliko opela wenze imaliko. David vir gesond. Ewe inika imdla into aukiba etsukiba ndifila abanaya abanti besiti kulingile. Akakuntu ingaku malinga nukisinkongeleo kodwa ingansidisa ekidaleni okisinkongeleo. Robert Langer. Ndisinga ikiban genduku. Even diafima. Diafimelana naya. David vir gesond. Ewe sisit seksu soke quasi ikupimelielan gokwesaensi nangokwing ondo indife inti isiti ingapanse ikugoba okisen kongeleo kwae iambisane notsensuo akinyalu. Robert Langer. Nguku inempembelelo enkele kwendalo esenkongeleyo ngindlela opata ngayo abanti kune nendlela ovensan ngayo nyengumzekelo. Ukanaye ikengabeku kwayo. Einani leo. Idafet vergezond. Einani leo izenzu zaku zibaliwe. Kingoke bekisele kiewit ikegina imbono womfanekisu lukaMsebenzi waku kine nubumi baku ngukibansi ienzilen yani luentu ka iongene nemengeni ukanaye imikobo. Idafet vergezond. Iweginen yani imbono womfanekisu Eintoni ekegina ikibeka kwae eintoni ekegina izengisa. Ienzen yani luentu. Robert Langer. Kilingele in die akikelela ikiba ndem lu iazi ndingem ti onienkani. Ikiba de kolalwa kwentu etile ndilala ndizama kwae ndizama. Anden kame lila ikiba ndifakalalwa kikiba kuku into inokwenza okilingiliao. Ikiba ndizifan gati sifimiene intuk ailuentu kibalilekila. Robert Langer. Iazi ndia kienza. Ndia kwenza konke okisemandleni am. Idafet vergezond. 10.
Inu chemist I janali yismfundo inu chemist academic.
Ienali vol iend isisilelo ien. Udliwano-ndlebe nene ayenkukele izibalaseleo kwemichiza. Kilingile. Ewig okukele kakilu. Kekera langer in die asi akonde lam lomsebenzi in dit het aangekonde lam lomsebenzi. Nansu into in die kalen gebinjinele egeorgiates. Kwae kwenzika izenai izentur is aan de kokelela ekebinin dit sensiele kwene kwiziku kwae in dit sense enkilu am Ukubhiyozela. Idafet vergezond. Kindet sensa endlela kuba imdla wam essentiele. Ke imbizo wam kiven govabo bakwikandelo lubinjinielit en gaba litini ikebiso laku ukane en gaba zizipi izentu izepambili uzinziliot ikiba. Ndinfuma ikiba ekwazi iketsensiela ekekibelene en kubo aubigkera en kubo aubinjiniele kenaya. Emfa kokunde konse nyengufilendlela insemini. Zizipi izenaye zizintu izepambili uzinziliaung hexesa lako nyengumfundi unisidanga omnai imfundi unisidanga. Robert Langer. Ewe kilingele indikinga nyengumfundi unisidanga indizifa ifina nkokwenene ikifunda iziseku kwae ifina ekwenza kakele eklasini. Ndiateta kwae ukukifanele kiba ayewenan tu epambili kiva. Robert Langer. Ndiateta andizekwenza ipando ukanae izinai izentu dendazi ikiba ndinga kiba kakele eklasini, nkukuke nyengumfundi opimeleleo indisinga ikiba iasi nave ifina ekwenza kwa into inaye kibika ifunda. Isiseku kakele kodwa ke ifinan gokwenene ikeketa iprojekti aupando kenaye nomsubisi vopando. Robert Langer. Ikiba ifumana epert. Ukanaye isidanga senkosin gebaning gokwenene imgebisi olingeleo kwae keteta iketini uko. Ndia teta ingetemba lokiba bakupata kakele kwae bakibeka kwendavu ukanaye baba kwendavu apu inukifunda kibu nakwabanaya. Idafet vergezond. Kilingile. Ewe elingele luentuken ditinga ikiba inenzi ulwete lunukifima ikiban gelikse sakie kwaban gimgenikibanti abanensi ngengsa aubebane kwae abanti abanensi badibana nemikubu kenae nemetieli mgeni. Eintoni ubusuluku inetemban gaiun gelikse sa lobibane. Robert Langer. Evert izintu izimbini. Inaya izintu ebendienza let bendicita exisa elinensin dizama ikulva lubebani. Iazi inaya ayen kampani indizintu dilio ekikalisini ay moderna di bienaya ayen kampani Usuku kalayo malanga nokwenza isitufu sukugunaya sekurfit iazi kinguki bakwisi gaba esebizwan gukiba lilingu lesetati lukienza. Kwae panse zonke in kampani izinza isitufu sukugunaya na kwae izu ziamba pambili malanga nukikibela pambili ekliniki sikwasebenzisa nanoparticles iazi isetainzi salva ikiambisa na.
11. Inu chemist I janali yismfundo inu chemist academic.
Yenali vol iend isisilelo ien. Udliwano-ndlebe nene ayen kukele izibalaseleo kwimichiza. Robert Langer. Kwae iazi keleo eindavu isenze lekilukio. Kwae senza msebenzi kwilebekwizitu zukigonea izine maski, ekwenza imaski insat ekwenza ventilators isensa ekwenza ventilators isalela lilayo iazi ikisebenza kwizitsizi ziempemlu izinuketize quasi ikulva nasu. Robert Langer. Sisebenza kifafaneu oletsal vegazi. Kisisebenza kakilu malanga nukizaman getemba ekwenza imaliku ikinangeni ikufit ikongezat iazi nangona ipandu liel vakuta kwizine izentu. Ngengsa emetetu aya university. Robert Langer. Iazi indisinga ikiba siakibuka nulu pandu kwae sisebenza kakile negatis foundation kwizintu izinuken Nceda elisve elisapulayo. Kwae izine izintu indinetemba lukiba zia kiba zibalilikile imelabeningexisa ilitile. Robert Langer. Kwae kwakuna ndia kolva kizu zonke izi zintu. Njuku ka asiziki eka iazi. Kwae ke kodwa aunke luentu sizame ekwenza. Idafet vergezond. Kendineme bizu emibini ongezelalveo malanga nomsebenzi vakun gobabani vekufit 19 gokwizintu zonke uzenzaiwe kenaye nubenjineli. Ngaba bunile impembelelo ukanaye isimise benzini. Idafet vergezond. Ngaba sele ikalile ikibuna izepimo somsebenzi vaku ikiza ketigan goki. Robert Langer. Ndingate impendilu kiluen tu kikiba sibune impembelelo indiateta ndingate neke into ukibande teta izenaye zezintu isizenziliaun goki ngapizili kwimenauka 1,45 udliwano ikidala iazi. Amasenswana amanchinchi anukihambisa nekleit artits. Robert Langer. Ndiateta in yengukunde tsuaud isitainzeswa moderna opfizer en kampani izinensi. Ndiateta kwakona abanenzi abanai abanti bafake isandlakieu. Kodwa sienze kwangetiba. Sie safelisa izinai enklubuze nanoparticles. Kakwae kwakona inenzil wenzivan gabafundi betekenae nezenae zezin davu. 12.
Inu chemist I janali yismfundo inu chemist academic.
Yenali vol iend isisilelo ien. udliwano-ndlebe nene iinguqulelo ezibalaseleyo kwimichiza. Xhosa. Robert Langer. Kendisinga ikiba izitu fuzuki khonaya azikabi nampembelelo okwanguki. Kodwan gapandle kuku abanti abaya bapat van gayo. Kodwa kumkibunakalan gati iluna temba lekilu lesiswet iluna temba lekilu lalabate kikikhonaya zizintu isinazo. Queensieve. Xhosa. Robert Langer. Sie sanchedisa ekwenzini imaski izinsa. Kwai iazik izagidi izininzi zazu siele zisitainse swan gabanti. Kwai ndiasinga iazi kaku imaski izing funu iazi ike izinaya zisimisebenzini kwai zikwakliniki. Izilingu. Xhosa. Robert Langer. Kwai iazi abahamben gokakavileza kakilu. Usuku. Kendisinga ikiba sekwazile ikwenza impembelelo kwidigilana siele sinetemba ngakumbi. David vergesond. Ke iazi akankanaya ibiyela imfa. Ishazile ndlela ote inenkani ngayu ukanaya inienkani. Ising sayo. Ngabala eintu waifindis vir ekakilene kwaku ukanaya eintu waya vaipalisa ekihambeni kweksa kwizifindo zako. Xhosa. Robert Langer. Ndisinga ikiba eintu indifelen dazalwan gayo iazi, ndisinga ikiba bendilala ndinenkani. Dignisekile veti abazali babetsinga ikiba. David vergesond. O kilingile. Ewe kilingile Xhosa Langer bekumnandi kakile ikuba nave namalanya. Diabilela kakilun hukitata exesa lukanchukula nam kwae nati siksuksen gekondo lakulom sebenzi. Kwaen huku venza ima liku onkiluku benjiniele bemishiza nakwimimandla e benjiniele bebimolekular. Xhosa. Robert Langer. Inkosi. Kiliulu kenay netamsanka. Udliwano-ndlebe warekodwan go 2020 lwe, ten nevshimist podcast ekwail wafeliswal wazel wasengatwan David. Josia Ferguson. 13.
Inu chemist I janali yismfundo inu chemist academic.
Yenali vol 1 isisilelo 1. Ukubhiyozela in Kali. Manani aukikalisa. Anestesiologist Xhosa. Emery Brown interpret. David Ferguson 1 Emery Brown 2. University Aasowart University Aasarvat. Papa swing het 15 Kamatsi 2023. Doi apps doik org 10.2142835 en 90 is 66.045184. Licensie Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License Bijnzet. 4.0 Nevchemist Yenali Esemfundo Nevchemist Academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa Manai Xhosa in Rein. Yenali vol 1 isisilelo 1. Brown interpret. Udliwano-ndlebe pakati kika David Ferguson amers bet verliesive podcast kenye nomamkele kenye noGqr. Emery Brown interpret. Edward Wood injengel benjinele besonango kenye ne computational neuroscientie kui Massachusetts Institute of Technology. David Ferguson. Indwendwil wam namelanien Ncғr Emery Brown. En kosin hukende di banisa nam namlanje. Kule kakule ikifakive. Nkukifetsane nye indiza kwazisa abapelapili bam gave. Het Emery Brown gi Edward wit in Yonwabela bezobenjinele bezonangu kunae ni computational neurosciences kui Massachusetts Institute of Technologie. I David vir gezond. I waren mzappel in Yonwabela anesthesia kwisikolu sezonangu sasa harfart kunae noGqr woketumalalisa entlinge. Kwisebedlele yikelele sasa Massachusetts. Xhosa. Brown wafimana iba ake imagnum cum laude qui applit mathematics quicoli asa harfart ima ake kenae nepet. Quisibalu isifela qui university asa harfart kenae nemt magnatsum ivonga quisikolu sezonangu sasa harfart. I David vir gezond. Xhosa. I Brown ei anesthesiologist statistician I pandul wake lofafaneul wense I galelu ilibalilekiliau eki kondeni I neurosciences eindlela I anesthetics isebenzaan gaiu en konveningikse sale anesthesia yikelele. Ke pandul wakel wienki kachamenani ieye wapelisa I algoritmes auke kwangsisa in kondisu ikisombilila I mingeni ibalilekiliau eulaliteiul vedata qui neurosciences. I David vir gezond. 2. Ukubhiyozela. Kunae no etet met 2014. Isebenzaan jeng lavili we harfart kunae met yalte sciences.
Inu chemist I janali yismfundo inu chemist academic.
Ienali vol eend is isilelo een. I pandul wake lubonakaliswe kui national public radio. Nev eortimis. Ukubhiyozela noGqr menai umculo in rein. I Brown interpret. In Scientific American Technology Review of T. Kunae nenkubo eie teknologie lavili uditanes waio vesiku lobenjinele bezonangu kunae ne science equipment. Kunae nompandi vesiku lipikover lokifunda kunae ne memori. I David vir gezond. Sebe lezubechile kunae nenzulolwazi equipment. Ilelinge leziku lezibalo ze mathematika. Enzulolwazing gimte vesiku lesiswe labakapi, linge lesiku lesiswe lobenjinele ilinge. Eisiku lesiswe lesayensi kunae nelinge lesiku lesiswe lezonayango. I David vir gezond. Ngu 2007 wannequa enis director spineer Award Universiteit. Anesthesiologists. Isi zizinae zizintu izinensi azifiziliau, isibalasiliau kakilu. Isazinzili. Nceda wankele uGqr Emery Brown. I David vir gezond. In kosi uGqr. Brown in goekende di banisa namlanje. Kule kakele ikuba ne podcast enzulolwazi nyengave kilentoe. Ebalasiliau. Gqr Brown ientoni imdla waku weksesa elide kwenkalu sciency. Ngabanye. Baksu bisse gezinnae zazu. Xhosa. Emery Brown. Ewe in disinga ikuba zalikan hukiamba kweksesa. Disinga ikuba malavambi imdlavam kamandla kui science wakala ekoliyeniksa. Ndaba nomdlaki manani. Ke ikuban gembalo mananit ikapolisa endlela sa manani kenae na algoritmes abante. Sikwasebenzisa ngokwenene ikelalutea idata aban gemblavam kwangetiba. 3. Inevchemist ienali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa manai umculo inrein. Ienali voleend is isilelo een. Ibroven intepekt. Emery Brown. Kwaai nanso into en die sikelao kilo lonke ekondo lam lomsebenzi indikalen die sebenzele ikifunda izipimo sotando nyengumfundi onesidanga emfa kukundafunda izinke suzetirkadian fikse sa lam lepelt. Sebenza kilingile. Emfa kuku si jonge akapelisieni isimfungukibanzi kula luteu vedata einiroshinse ukanai ikiyonga ululive beneral spikke si jonge kweeg amandla eti asekulale nikenai nesin klobuze zinte. Emery Brown. Kwaeke ikisika apu imdla vam wakila ekizamini ikikonda I anesthesia. Njuku kindingati abu malavambi. Inkalu ekigsilwe kizu ezepambilik izu zibalu kwae emfa kuku izibalu zisetainziswa kwiniroshinse kenai na anesthesiologheid indlela sa anesthesia yikelele. Idafet vergezond. Njuku kinditingan gavu nawapi na imgangatu womlinkaniselu ukanai imegangatu abanti abanenzi baya kiti inayo. Eminenzi omlinkaniselu ibesisifindiswa isepimeleleut ipimelele epat ayako. Ifila aarfart eemt aku ifila aarfart ma ifila aarfart ba ifila aarfart. Ipimelele amabasu amanenzi. Idafet vergezond. Salenai Oulinti Ulinenzi National Academy of Inventors, National Academy of Science, National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Medicine. Njuku Ginan Jani Mbunu Umfanekiso Umkilukum Sebenzi Waku Naki Bumi Baku Njukibanzi. Idafet vergezond. 4. Kilo Nayaka Izau Imanayaka ile 175. Kwaeke ikaketa pakati ikaketa ingsalenaya aluentu. Inevchemist ienali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa manai umculo inrein. Ienali voleend is isilelo een. Ibroven intepekt. Ienzan jani luentu. Emery Brown. Kwae keksa isiti imfanikisu umkili obekisa kivu. Idafet vergezond. Njokwemfunde kenai naven jokwaku Ginan jani mbunu umfanikisu umkilun jokwemiba gezelal vieu. In jongo uzibekilieu inselu ayaku ein jongo kenai nombunu waku ngubumi baku. Emery Brown. Ewe indisinga ikuba enaya ezintu endiayen dazama ikizenja kukizama ikilingisa mbizu ubalilekilieu. Kilingila. Kwae into waifimanayun gemibizu ebalilekilieu kikuba avakwazi ikiesum bililan gemizizi emelani. Njuku ke uku kiedala nyengum zila omde. Emery Brown. Kate mzekelo ingsaki eukitinga malinga nukiba isebenza jani I anesthesia. Nansu into ieye ayaba. Umbizu okwangukit kwae silandela emfa kwayo. Iazit eintu ieza kiban gumbizu uchela imngeni. Emery Brown. Kwae ikiba ia kwazi ikiaisum bilila ia kiba niempembelelu izibanzi kengekipela nye ikakatalila izigilana kodwa kwakuna. Kwinirushinsen hukibanzi kwisainsin hukibanzi. Lobo vizinto en dizame ikisebenza kizu en yenwukuthola. Imibizu abalileki liau en gukomnai imzekelisu kenai nokikinga malinga nezinkesuze tirshadian, izinkesuze tirshadian aunke indavo. 5. Inevchemist yenali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa manai ongelukkera in rein. Yenali vol eend is isilelo een. Ibroven in te pekt. Emery Brown. Balavula imsebenzi veti vemelan gemela. Ukakona sinaku ikilinganisan hukishanikiliau and lela abazifimanan khaiu eprupati zabu kwakona inyempembelelu izibansi. Kendisinga ikiba isis vankatelu sizifakalisi izibinisia kiba seketa imibizu ebalilekiliau kwae silandela luamibizu ebalilekiliau. Idafet vergezond. Kulingile. Iwet ilingile luentu ilingile lonte. Kengezipi endlela ezekitekiliau zomti ukelekiliau ongaba ie vazikelanisa kwae yele kunkalu aisainsi. Zizipi endlela ezekitekiliau. Ndiazi ikiba isibenza ne anesthesia. Ndiazi ikiba akavava. Ingali amanani. Idafet vergezond. Zizipi eindlela ue wongeza ibuchile baku kwezu nkalu. Emery Brown. Ewe indisinga ikiba sikalan gezinke soze tirshadian indisinga ikiba elaikona yaunantu epambili indienziliau. Vai jonge idata rekord van geluksesa en yenguki jonga izinke suzubesisi izingenduko. Ikilandelela en kubo circadian kwidegilane ukane kwizifundu zokifunda. Emery Brown. Dasebenza ikizin dineke en kazu echanikiliau aizun sekimo. Njoku ikizama ekwenza imudili ibamba isakivu sedatan jokichanikiliau. Kam ganjoku kinokwenzeka. Kwae sisebenzisa into isiabizan jokibazi harmonic regression technique is ekwenza luentu kodwa emfa kuku en gaikinye apu kodwa ipelisa esakelu esepileleu. 6. Ngamangu efanayun hukumhaku kodwa kuku ngamangu ingenduku apu ndienda kwazi ikienza. Inevchemist yenali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa manai ongelukkera in rein. Yenali vol eend is isilelo een. Ibroven in te pekt. Emery Brown. Kenhokwenani inukulinganisa imiba aisinkesu itxsa I amplitude kwae ikisuka apu quasi ekwenza enchilu zukengakiniseki malanga iasi endlela ebesizetemben gaio malanga niempavi esize nazo. Emery Brown. Ewe ukukifimela ikiba ibenesa kelo senkazu kwae enfakuku ie komnai imsebenzi kniengaya. Ikiyonga idata ayeniroshinja. Sebenzisa kwae isebenzisa kwae ndiendaki bekande sebenzisa kivu wonke imsebenzi vam. Emery Brown. Kwae kenyalu. Idata ayeniroshinse kiba isantaya ureku dayo kunkondu kenai nenkubu ayenerfaus apakati iagikukikika yatsen san hukyamba kwesisa. Kwae ifina endlela samanani izitizi bamba ulutsen sun hukyamba kwesisa ikize echanieke. Kwae ke izu zizinto en dan disikelaniса nazo ekibinen difinde nyingingsalenai eieperd. Ike kusu. Emery Brown. Ken Felixa inenziel weendlela ebezisitayin zeswazimile. Kwae. Ken Usuku ngati isakwokelo kwesiXhosa ngokwenene. Ken kala kwisakelo apu besisele sinyendlela ezegikukayo. Emery Brown. Luentu okibamba nguki ekihambeni kwesisa and dakwazi ikapolisa enkazu izishaneki liayo zizuntlobu sedatan ngukinyalo. Ken gamane amazvi ikikondan gokwenani eprupati zedata kwaen genenesi zipi izintu izibalileki liayo zengzaki. 7. Inevchemist ienali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa menai umculo inrein. Ienali vol eend is isilelo een. Brown interpret. Emery Brown. Ndisinga ikiba zizinaye zizintu en dizame ikufsila kizu kwae sindinike izinaye iasi, umlinkanisilu otile wempi melelo namelanye. David vergezond. Ewe indingatsoen ngukinyalo. Einyenyalo. Ke ifimenen yani indawo enkongeliao elingeliao ikize ipimelelen gokwesayensi nan gokwenkondo. Ndisinga ikiba abanti abanenzi banenjongu ukanae bandvinela ikiba liziku elifana na harfart kinae namanae amaziku ngukinyalo. David vergezond. Ke ifimenen yani ikiba wazin yani ikiba eindawo ifanelekeliao au kiba ipimelelen gokwesayensi nanko bekrelekrele. Emery Brown. Ewe andinaketsu ikiba bendiasi. Diateta indixinga ikiba en dandifana nabane abafindi ikikala erfart. Iasi. Ngeniene kwinkalo izinenzi echikumisikile kuku iziko linukikinika. Kodwa kanaeksa dandilapo di city kilingele ngeniene nguku kufinekanditate etiba luki kwaendikim bilan nguketen ngu ukuksan dande. Emery Brown. Kwakiksan dandi semchinchi kwaen dandi tinga malinga nentu indifina ikienza kwisikilu sam ipandulvam etisisi ipezuli. Iken wakter uwaingen yengel wazi kwisiebe liengchikaka mananin gelootse sa, wati, ewe ekibini isingan gukia kwisikolo. Sezonayango kifanele ikiba ibale itisisi. Itisisi aisidanga a. Emery Brown. 8. Inevchemist ienali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa menai umculo inrein. Ienali vol eend is isilelo een. Brown interpret. Isiluku sezonayango. Kwae itebise ikiba ndiye keteta nonjenga wazi ifret mosteller ngalo Mandela kwae wakiba ekapolisini iprojekti au pandu kenai nae kiba waingum swepesa u waseMzantsi ekifindini izepimo zotando. Emery Brown. Kwae ukikia kiba lisebo ililinge liao kum ikiba ndiyoine iprojekti ifana naliao. Ailuentu ke indain zayo. Kendisinga ikiba iayunantu ipambili aikikikonda uku. Lulapi ilubul vamatiba abekona arfart emfa kuku waseMzantsi kiba inukiba ilapu kwae waseMzantsi amatiba ebekona. Emery Brown. Einani liao. Ndisinga ikiba enaya izintu zokwenani inditinga ikiba kwakin yaluun geluk sesa, ndisinga ikiba isakiba itayala. Itiba lokabala itisisi epizuling gendawo kifenda epambili eintu iayayehu iamankalisa kwae elinchidukam exisa elide. Emery Brown. Kwafinekan die jonge kifetsane kwaen die jongen gokwam ikibat iazi omnaya wamanani apizulukwe labati wenze ipando. Dai bona ndlela avaisingan gayo ndlela avaisebenzisana gayo nezinaya izazinzili noGqr. Kwae kwandensida kakili ikitinga malanga nolobu uvazazinzilu kwemeko noGqr kanaya. Emery Brown. Dandifina ikiba kanay nendlela indifina ikakwazing gayo akwenza ipando kwaen di kate kakulu. Enaya intun khonyengal wazi imosteller aikikiba wainukisebenzisa nabani na ingasebenzisa nuena mti ibalase liawum goGqr abafindi abapimelele izidanga ipostots kodwa inukisebenzisa nabafindi abangakat weswa izidanga niengam. 9. Inevchemist ienali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela uqaphele manai umculo inrein. Ienali volend isisilelo 1. Brown interpret. Emery Brown. Kwaeke ikiba nalu ngukibona nye oku kwaen den atu ngukinani sekiliau ikiba bazama ikilinganisa. David vergezond. Uwe kilingele oku. Ilingele ngukikini sekiliau. Ngoku. Itetan gum kwene waku wokia kwisikulu subagkara kwijunia eko ineaka. Xhosa nyani ukanae itate isagkibun nyani pakati kwam te pat ukanaem. Ewe indisinga ikiba likelong geni abanti abanensi abadebana nalu. David vergezond. Walila nyani pakati kwam te pat ukanaemt. Emery Brown. Ewe inditinga ikiba kwenzeken tueni ngaban dan di sazi kan difika ekolini, dan difina ikia kwisikulu subagkara. Oku. Vaikinisekile. Kwae andekambili kakele ikiba bekikenauka wamwesebini ukanayen hapambili, kodwan dachiba ekibini vaifina ekwenza ipet. Kanan yalu. Emery Brown. Kwaen daken dat andanan gokwenjene nezi balut isa pakati konauka visibini kenayen nomchinchi, dachiba ekibinin difina. Ekwenza ipet am. Kwizibalu kiba ndetandan ye iparadag kenaye in gokwenjene izibalu. Ai eintun ye inamandla kakilu nesakelu isinamandla kakilu. Emery Brown. 10. Inevchemist ienali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela uqaphele manai umculo inrein. Ienali volend isisilelo 1. Brown interpret. Kwaken yalu kwae kisen yalu. Kwaen dan defina nye ikiai konda luentu kwaen datinga ikuba. Kodwa dan defina nukiba ngqr. Kwaen datinga ikiba ngukikasen yeu nukilalanisa nokwenza enaye ukanai enaye eketiene ngazenzi zombini. Emery Brown. Kwae lieu eindlela in dasensan gayo isagkibo. Laayeng gamango jij afantgarden geluk sesa kubatsaan dandinge na aarvaartpet in kubo akakum te wense epet kwizibaluum gapambilik kwae ayentu entle lieu. Imbono ontsa. Emery Brown. Kwakako in Gamangu en sa apu kodwa nakwizinay en kubuzilizven hensa Ukuba abanti bandi yonga nyengentu en sinsitsan dit het haaksan disiti ailuan toe en dan difina ikienza ipetam. Emery Brown. Kodwa kwakikasile kim Ukuba ieza ainsimi ia ainukankakiniseki ukinenzi idata inenzi kwaen hakim hoki. Kwae Ukuba nabanti abakikis win hukisisikweni kinae nendlela aukelinkanisa, oku ikankakiniseki, ainza izigkibu ikankakiniseki kibuna kala ngate eindlela eindalo. Emery Brown. Ai luentoon digkibe ekibienin die eense. David vergezond. Iwet ilingile luentoe ilingile lonte. Ngukuke inekwe lonke iksandifa kenae noki fysikus wa kwaku igke. 11. Inevchemist ienali eisenfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela uqaphele menai umculo in rein. Ienali vol eend is isilelo een. Brown interpret. Emery Brown. Kilinkile Kenyalo. Iazi in disinga Ukuba isapun govukikala akako matanda buzum galuentu quiet iazi ukifizikisi vieu akakum nandi. Kwae abanalo ikakazimla. Iazi Ukuba isapul wako ligenwe kakule isapul wako alon wabanga. Emery Brown. Ke iazi sekita exesa ilinenzi iazi exesa lukaPamlan giempelafeki iazi ingexesa. Elutaini entwasa lobu xa abantwana babapakati, xa abantwana bebanchinti kwae lobu lukiginisekisa satata wuliden gamatsesa amana oneaka. Emery Brown. Kwae emfazi wam nyengam ietanda ikihamba. Ketina kwae ruku Ukuba ndinoambu ulia kwendavu eza lekinieu ikia kinika intitu, siligikula lube luhambu luosapu ungukinyalo. David vergezond. Kulengile. Emery Brown. Kun gokwenza luentu einze Ukuban denze Ukuban de landele imisebenzi ambelana nomsebenzi, wam kodwa nokiginisekisa Ukuba iasit andepelikani nosapul wam. David vergezond. 12. Inevchemist ienali eisenfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela uqaphele menai umculo in rein. Ienali vol eend is isilelo een. Brown interpret. Iwe eintu epambili inkililio. Ngukuke Ukuba nezintu ezepambilizia kentromat ikagina ilingelalwano. Ke inuketi eintweni impimelelo akon yengfilend lela kwensimi igker. Brown. Eintweni onuketi iense. Lulapi ipavi. David vergezond. Ngaba eikikikila kwaku isingemntwana. Ngaba eilexesa laku harfart. Okana enkubo aku ukakulalva. Okana embuno aku ngebomi. Eintweni onuketi einfumele kwimpimelelo aku nyengfilend lela ensemini. Ngaba kiba einsebisu. Emery Brown. Ndisinga Ukuba abazali bam kenae nosapul wam bafanalva einbeku enkilin lobu lukendibeka kwendlela ilingilieu. Ai ngukum zekelu kibazali bam bobabini babang abafandisin sapu ubabafakalalva Ukuba imfundu ibalilekig kita. Emery Brown. Nanini na abendifina ekwenza into ukanayendilandele into balala besemfa kwam. Kwai kabazal vana bam. Sisuluku kakile isikol vini kwakuna nguku abanti babaya kusuluku bati kilingile ya kiba kakile nyenhuku imzalvana vaku kwai izu ilubu izentu kwakuna vadala isiksa isitile inkitazu. Emery Brown. Kodwa hai abazalvana bam kipela kodwa nabazala bam kwakuna. Nabu baba kiba kakili isikol vini kwaeke nakwizenaya. Amasvi kwakaku izit inani ilifanayo ulubu uvimizikulu apu andikundi ikiba sa sikwasebenzisa lukaM. Nguku kodwa sinukitanga ngaluo-ndlebe. Emery Brown. Kodwa kuku abanti aba befina ikifana kinhuki emudeli zukifuvina akinyalo. Kilingile. Kodwa omne wabazala bam irubert Brown uvaya ekarnegie melon waingamblali vibola omneazi ochwisilieu ingemvinde woonous kwae waisuloko. 13. Inevchemist yenali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela uqaphele menai umculo in rein. Yenali vol eend is isilelo een. Ibroven interpret. Iku lala pansi ifunda enswading Xhosa lasa lutaini. Emery Brown. Ndethetanye nguluum van ekisu ndandinavun gae. Yeazi ikiban dinomnaya wabazala bam yeazi ngubani. Eindtoeniksa sasinga bandwana eisifundisa imigka ifela kuyumspina fure ulu lobu ulvento. Emery Brown. Kwaeke imbone wokiba silimko wawe pulile. Ngokwinene ayayau luen tuenditinga ikiba ndiaikambilan ngokwinene lue mbono. Iazi okakona ibekrilekrile kilen davu kwai ikeleze isapul veti ulobo olifana iazi ngokapole kwako. Emery Brown. Kwai kendisinga ikiba olu lindifakelet mzikalo in yengam. Umkiliva vam ngambali ulingiliau kakile kwai umkiliva vam opakati vaya ngali efiziksi ukanae usiele isidla imlala pansin hoki. Kakwakunat akizanga kibuna kala ngati ngolu lobu ngeluksesa kodwa babeseta imifalu nghuken gafilisio ikiban dizame iketsiban gapa nangapa. Emery Brown. Ukubab kwenda ngukumzekelo. Kendisinga ikiba ndisinga izu indisinga ikiba aimfalapi kwae infakuku vakapila ikiba siele inamatiba waseMzantsi. Infakuku ibenokuzula. Inabanti abatela abakapela ikiba inaku kwae bazama Nceda ikiba ikapela uku nyengumfundisivam. Emery Brown. Exeter uvaiteta elvimi izentlani. Kwaeke bendifina ikifana iazi indizame ikiba nubishile kwilvimi izininzi avainazu ukanaye mzekelo sandandilapu sandandifunda isidanga aarfart inaye aye. Yengali zuketumalalisa entlinge appel Jakmspiak lukaMandela. 14. Inevchemist yenali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela uqaphele menai umculo in rein. Yenali vol eend is isilelo een. Ibroven interpret. Emery Brown. Ibengomnaye wabatubisi bam itisisi. Kwae ngimtivukikala uvandetata kwegimbilotando. Kwae emfa kwimeneoka ilikala kamfa exandakalisa ikia kwi anestisiulugai ndakwazi ikia kiendasan dafumana isibisu ae vandensedan dalingeselela ikibandi lamkele. Emery Brown. Ikikeleza kwi anestisiulugai kwae ndagiba kwilukiba eilentu bendifina ikingenakieo. Nchuku ikongeza. Nchuku zizintu izi ninzi asiontu nye enaya. Nchuku abanaye basanukiti abanaye basalila. Abanaye kwangetiba abanaye abanti indiba yongilieu emfa kwexishab abanaye abanti abati, bekonda kwae befima amandla am. Emery Brown. Nceda. Kwae ndandinum bilielu kakilin galuentu. David vergezond. Wovt in amandla. Ewe. Nchuku ibeka ikikonda kwam kibonakala ngati ekiliele kun kibeku awukigwesa. Ewe indikinisekile ikiba kuku izintu izinukiti sepitulwe kodwa ite ekiliele kun davo apu kibonakala ngati wonke imtu isikila ikigwesa. David vergezond. Ibinokitini. Ngaba inukiti ngabazale baku ukanae abanta kwini nudade wabu abaye bafak isandla koko. Emery Brown. Ewe mzikelo. Ewe nyenuku kinyalu nusapu lukaMama isapu lukaMama wakilela Pittsburgh kanae. Imama nudade wabu umdala kangangukiba imama inkumnae wabantwana abasetjenke kwae kewain gewisibini imdala kwae idade wabu waikrilekrillen gukigitisileo. 15. Dia quasi ekwenza isimu senkondo avaisuluku inasu itata. Ndiza kikinika mzikelu ibem naya. 16. Inevchemist yenali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela uqaphele menai umculo in rein. Yenali vol eend is isilelo een. Brown interpret. Emery Brown. Iazi isise wakke umdala imama waikrilekrile kakilu. Ipimelele kwisikulus samabanga apakameleo kwae wainimenaka iei 16. Hai indekembila imalime wam ongelandelayo engeni. Uvisitati wati ingenauku numakazi waku lu nave wandenza kwanziman gingsa aukiba benzilin jalu. Emery Brown. Kakele isikolvieni. Kwafinekan denze kakele iazi olo lobo ulvento. Kulengila. Kwai iazi kwilene ikala itata vaikitile kakilu. Ndeteta iketi vaingumti uvaba enkedamaksa ina 14. Aina nobiti vake. Vais velikal vengabazali baka bobabini. Emery Brown. Bakiliswan hitatumkile wabu kodwa babenumtu otin hitatumkile vake itatumkile wam waingumfana umangalisayo. Waingumlinkiselele kodwa nae waingumfama uliniene ae inesikwinga somalaba isekile kakilu apu nase Florida apu ndakilela kuna isesingabake nana melania. Emery Brown. Kwae waingumti oketeleun hukimankalisayo. Kwae ndiayazi luentu amkapikisa itata kiba itata vaisuluku isenzela isapu izentu zombini kodwa nasekelaleni. Vaizinikele kakilukilentul waka. Emery Brown. Kendisinga Ukuba inaniswini ndiazi luentu iazi ndizize luem buenu iazi izun jonge izu. Inklubuze. Olu lobu. Inevchemist yenali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa menai ongeluGqirha in rein. Yenali vol eend is Isilelo 1. Ibroven in te pekt. David vir gezond. Die lapa ekisen die mamele. Emery Brown. Xhosa itatonkilu katata vaifina Ukuba abiyele Florida Kuba emfa Kuba etsatile balala enev aurk nase Pittsburgh. Kwae vaifina apende abie Kuba ifina imtu olala kuvabu itata wakiba ekubeni ake endlu. Emery Brown. Usuku 1957-1958. Kwaen yenguku inuketelekelela ibavu akazanga akwazi ikifumana imalim buleku ebankini au kwaka endlu. Kwaen yenguku sisazi inay aizuna zintu zibalileke kakili ikunkana kupipa lase milika kikakwazi ekwaka endlu kwae yaasi ikibika enkambi akin yalu. David vir gezond. Even die afima. Emery Brown. Ngoku andizangende kwasi oku de kwaimenauka iminenzi kamfa. Ngeniene wabuleka imali kufinkile autobode ikize ake endlu. Akakwazanga ikifimana imalim buleku abankini. David vir gezond. Wovi. 17. Inevchemist yenali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa menai ongeluGqirha in rein. Yenali vol eend is Isilelo 1. Ibroven in te pekt. Emery Brown. Kwaen dia kumbilatsa sasilavila in kaki in dandepakati is himi ukanai ilinanai in Xhosa kwae andizangende kwazingsam. Ikikonda onke into yenze kayo. Emery Brown. Kodwa ndakavileza ndakonda Ukuba kwenzeken 20. Kodwa yeunantu aie Ukuba ndlela ikelekeleo Ukuba abanti abanenzi basemilika bebea kisebenzisa akwaka endlit ukifumana imalim buleku abankini kwae akwenza okubekangafumanieki. Kie. Emery Brown. Kwafineka eze nielenaya ikunga Eliza kisebenza kwae watinga malinga nokuba. Kwaen hukunditingan galuen tun huki. Ndina nisat. Avakwazanga akwenza oku. Iazi ikiban gendepin huki ikiba ebengeku. Wenze luen tu. Emery Brown. Kodwa emfa kuku ithabate kiluen tu ikonda Ukuba abanti babeka imikubu endleleni aku kia kifineka isingen gayo. Eva. Ndiateta kwaen dizibuanan disenzan yalukumatali alikalab kodwandeteta Ukuba malavambi ainkomnai yeuna mizikelu ibambakayo Ukuba abanti ebankini babanga kwasi. Emery Brown. Kulalwa Ukuba into Afrika waseMelika ofina akwaka nyengendli aangempela nyengestolet. Iazi amagumbi ukulala amatati. Igimbi lukaLambela izimbini izinesikingata yazi igimbi lukulala ilikumgangato uikelizilio yazi indli veranda isikaleni apu babisinga ikiba singaba nombonu nye otile itautaumbe ilinchinane ukanaye into inyalo. Emery Brown 18. Inevchemist yenali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa menai umculo in rein. Yenali vol eend is isilelo 1. Brown interpret. Kodwa oku kwakikide kwintu avaisinga itata kiba vaifundele ibegisa bemizim feliso kwanokuli. Nhuku ayinga. Vaisazi indlela aukwenza izinto. Umkiliva wake kenai numa lima bakke ngukwenene bayaka indlu. Idafet vergezond. Woewut elinkele lonte. Ewe kulingele ndifenda kakile Xhosa. Ke iweginen yani imbonu kwae insebenziswano kwendavu ayaku, kwilebi ayaku, kwendavu ayaku aukisebenza komisa yikelele. Iweginan yani imbonu. Kenai nukisebenza ngukibambisana. Ikinisekisan yani ikiba wonke inti iasebenzisana ikibuna imfanikiso umkilu akwae iazama. Ala ilikumgangato uikelizilio yazi indli veranda isikaleni apu babisinga ikiba singaba nombonu nye otile itautaumbe pendila lue mbizu ibalilekilio. Idafet vergezond. Akankanele. Emery Brown. Disinga ikiba akuku izintu izimbini. Disinga enayed ikiba ikangele. Ngiensaki izepulilio kwae ifimana abanti bonwaben ngiensaki zako. Disinga ikiba sisikalu isu. Kwae ke yeazi vina akilula abanti kwae ieke. Wasebenzisa ibutule babu bukiela ikikalisa ikisebenza akwae babakukela. Emery Brown. Kodwa eilentun diaitandayo. Diaitanda ikakukela abanti ikibantieda basombilile insaki kwae imfa exal befina kukundinike inshidul vamp ikibantieda bapelisa amandla abu ukidala kwae ndiazi ikibazisa ikiba batwala insaki. Emery Brown. 19. Inevchemist yenali esemfundo inevchemist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa menai umculo in rein. Yenali vol eend is isilelo 1. Brown interpret. Disinga ikiba ayeunan tu ibalilekilio kwae ienza ibemnandi. Diatetat iazi indizifan gati kwemiba eminensin gukindingem lali veshier liader in Antoni na ienaya. Andingum tu kakilu uvenza imsebenzi. Emery Brown. Ndekonan ye akunyalo. Ukanaye iazi. Ewe indisinga ikiba sinenile kwae sinika enkubisu kwae sikinisekisa ikiba abanti ababambeki. Kwae indisinga ikiba ayawenan tu ipambili indienzayo kwae ndengatsu nkukinani sekilio ikiba kumnande. Emery Brown. Kumnandi ikisebenza kanaya. Kikibikela abanti abakueu iazit imenayaka iminenzi mchinane vam inkikelelo zenkosi indinga zangen die zazi den diben gatin dimdalan gemenayaka in gama 20 kinokiba baben yalu wo bij zazi yezi zintu. Vena banukitinga kapela into abanukienza okanae baya kakwazi ikienza iazi ikia pambili. Emery Brown. Kwesisa Elizayo. Kwae ke ikulala nya apu imangaliswa ailuentu kwae izama ikikukuzilela okukiliulu olvenene. Kwae mna indizama ikagina okukukibeka imelan gemela. Idafet vergezond. Ngelexesa en yengukiba sikala ikisonga, akankanaye ndlela ikiba krele kwake pulilen gayo en dingapazaman galentoe. Nangona ken yalut andikinisekanga ikiban gemailizu okueu kwemeku izinensi ukanaye kwizanga izinensi. Nhuku ibia kwinzan 20. Ngaba inukenfuma iketsensa luentoe. Idafet vergezond. Ewe zondavu zembaleki izin salane kibanti abanchinsi kodwa niendavu zukifunda. Singenzan yani ikiba isu sigedimisa kapaken gakumbi. Indlavu bekrelekrele kenaye nopelisul wenkondo kifanile kile exesa kenaye nomgidu. 20. Inevchimist ienali ezenfundo inevchimist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa menai umculo in Ienali vol eend is isilelo een. Ibroven interpret. Emery Brown. Ewe indiateta indikinga ikiba kifineka senzen yalo. Ndeteta ikiban dinonkete kiban deteta ikiban disisifindiswa kwaen dingena. Esayensi kwaen diazi ikiba abanti kifineka basi malanga nizintu zesayensi kenaye nezu nklobu zezintu. Kodwan ditinga ikiba iazi indinetayala kiben hukitata exesa luketeta nomtu onyengamp ikifimela. Emery Brown. Ndibalise ibali lam. Idafet vergezond. O vivo. Emery Brown. Nhukiba iazi in jalu. Iazi into kion wabisan gakumbi ikwazi ikiba iaison tatum ifimene amankaki. Ngamankaki angama 50 kwae ipimelele indlalo wekaltes. Emery Brown. Iazi kwae eina ani leo. Idafet vergezond. Eina ani leo. 21. Inevchimist ienali ezenfundo inevchimist academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa menai umculo in Ienali vol eend is isilelo een. Ibroven interpret. Emery Brown. Nangona kinyalu iazi ikekwazi ikethanda mzekelo. Ndinabatati emfakubavu ndinamagora amatati amakava ongezelelveu kenaye nezibalo. Onay ibn yaman baneker ingali ezibalo inama ifela kwit. Waingem tivukikala ikibuna kalisan gokwenene imikelo aale tirkadia izinambizane ezepima ruku kwimenaka iae 17. Emery Brown. Kawaina nisile kwae wakwenza okingapizile kwentu ifana nimikelo imine ukanaye emelani. Nhuku wakalaksa waine menaka iae 17 kilingile. Kwae kamalawam biwae enzilil wazi eidata eukikala eliswe ksa ishingan gaio. Ukanaye omnaye imtin hukaterine Johnson en dafandan gaie en dafana nye en dibitwan gemoya. Emery Brown. Nhukisisisiku en Nkali ezibalo basitaini en Nkali ezibalo asa Afrika asimilika isibenze endlela zuki hamban genvilumua kumerkirei aukikala kwaen ditinga ikiba kwanemisini asinkatini asigemini. Indiateta kavitsingen yinghayo. Wensa isibalo en gesandla. David vir gesond. Liewe einde lewe. Emery Brown. Dit het Ukuba aloon toe ifana nye nengeonayani. Kwae mtivisitati innyeni waba netam sanka luki dibana no David. Blackwell ongenyengel wase Afrika waseMzantsi Berkeley University, California, Berkeley in jengel wase visibalo. Dit het nie in jengeng kondo imankalisayo etete etambiliaut ilindilven ukubhiyozela Ukuba wain yalo ekrele kakilo. 22. Inevchemist ienali esemfundo inevchemist akademis. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa manai umculo in rein. Ienali vol eend is isilelo een. Brown interpret. Emery Brown. Umtivukikala wase Afrika waseMzantsi onheilwe National Academy of Sciences nu 1964 kakele imeneaka 100 emfa kukiba Academy asekwan gokwenene uvukikala wase Afrika waseMzantsi vanheilwa. Nee. Kwaeke iazi indikangan gabanti abanye kwaendeti Xhosa ikiba ndengaba nantuni na ifana naba bafana iazi kim na iazi ngukikasilio. Emery Brown. Ikifysikus wakikalebron jamus ukanai imagit Johnson zintu izilala kitet van gazu kodwa nyenga kwinsimi iazi dibuna imtu onien gaba banti kwae bafana nam bangamakava kwae abuan gabanti indibabunayo. Ikifina ikiba nyengaya. David vir gesond. Kilingile. Nguku nyenguku sigtiba. Ngaba inalu nalepina itibisu kwabo bafina ikilandela insimi usebenza kieungoki. Nguku izazinzili izisaka sayu. Lilepi ikebisu onuketi ilineka abu bafina ikilandela insimi isibenza ngoki nukiba zizibalo ukanaye ieza ukanaye epet. Nie. Emery Brown. Disenga ikiba bazama ikibanda kanaika kwae bazize kenae namafa kwangetiba. Dia kiksilela indifimana elieta pansa aunke imela kuba fundi abasiela ikiza nukisebenza kwikela lam gokweneani kwae babe nemeneaka ialikiliao ikisika kwisikulu samabanga apakamiliao iazi ikia pizuli iazi apostles zekulie amabanga apakamiliao. Emery Brown. Kwae ndimangalisive kikiba abanaye baba bafundi bandikliele ikiba sele besazi ikiba abanaye babu basika uniteit status. Abanaye abanyalu. Basikan gapandle ngukisisiku ngukisiebenzayu kwembombu zone somlaba. Kwae kekodwa ikikonda ikiba ailuentu abanti abayenzayu kwae banga binientluenin gokwenza uku kwae ikiba ukukikala. Emery Brown. 23. Inevchemist ienali esemfundo inevchemist akademis. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa manai umculo in rein. Ienali vol eend is isilelo een. Brown interpret. Bala into ongai faun gokuba deel kubika ikiba iafina. David vir gesond. Kinene. Emery Brown. Kuba ken yalut izama ekwenza Kuba eunke into ue finayu litiba ilenae lukifumana inaya vul vaku imneango. Nye ikiba inayo kwae ikonde ikiba amane amatiba aya kifiliekat inukibuna ikiba la eintu ieinzivan habafandi abafela kumfalapi ya lekenyeun hoki. Emery Brown. Kwae ndisinga ikiba abafandin hukibanzi en hakumbi abafandi abanchinchi abangamowanga bakililikile ikiba batata ukifanayo en lela ifanayo. David vergezond. Die afima. Die vielen ukapele leu. Lilepeke elene lavuna matabiso allen shidu ovamkel vayun gqr. Broven nyenguku sikiba. Lilepi eluna tibisu lilenchidu ukanae itibisu olifimana kibazali baku nyenguku ibetsilu ubebeketiele kwae bekrele kriele nku nabalangane baku ukanae unyengalvasi. David vergezond. Ngavapi avuna matabisu alenchidu. Emery Brown. 24. Inevchemist Yenali Esemfundo Inevchemist Academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa manai umculo in rein. Yenali vol eend is Isilelo 1. Brown interpret. Abu Babayayonan tunde tetan chayo indisinga ikiba sinenzi izintu indizising chayo yaasi ekiyongeni nyenyenga bazali bam yaasi nyengukisebenza nzima kwae kodwa emfakuku ikakutaza ikifina ibekrilekriele yaasi. Kwae nam. Nditingan hukikinisekiliayo. Emery Brown. Wole luentu kwae izama ikakilisa oku. Ndekembilanye imama esetin Xhosa letilen dakikseliela ikiba ikrelekrelen hukagritiseliayo. Iazi ikiba vainjalu. Kwakaisa mlope ikiba ilalan hukakililekiliayo ngati. Iazi izintu isabanaku ikizinzat iazi kengekuenam na kupala kodwa nabazalvana bam. Emery Brown. Kwae enkaki elene leluanatsisa likatiliao vati iazi ikiba bendinamatiba indikinisikile ikiba ndengawafumana. Iben hapezilikinam nhoki. David vergezond. Iwe indie viele luam fakalelu enaya. Emery Brown. Naluen tu kanaya. Dia tetap ulu lubu lukina matela kum kwae lifiele litit ewe iazi, dinanzelikile ikiban dizame ikapimeliela kanghang ukundi naku kiba imama venze ikiban difikiliela aponde kueun hukik. Kwae van kama into inenzi ikizen di bekielen davun dikio. Emery Brown. Kwae kifinekat iazi kifinekan dense into enaya. Emfa kuku kenfunaiva kwen kamangu izeki tazayo. Ndekembilanye ikiba imalima vam vaiteta kanaya luentu iazi akibulingu ikibam nande. 25. Inevchemist Yenali Esemfundo Inevchemist Academus. Ukubhiyozela Xhosa manai umculo in rein. Yenali vol eend is Isilelo 1. Brown interpret. David vergezond. Even die afima. Emery Brown. Kwae ke ikiba Nceda imti ikiba abapi melelen hukifanelikiliau nkukilila nyep hai ibunzili, kwae inukitata endlela izinenzi. Inukiban yalu. Ikidi bana nomti isitratweni ekensidini imti ngomsebenzi wake, kendisinga kwendavu itila apu amanae amatibisu an kwenu indiva fimiene apu malavambi izinai izintu kodwa. Emery Brown. As in die enkond wenin goekie. I David vir gesond. Ilingele loon toe ewe Xhosa en koseka kilin goekizimana nam namlanje. Bekim nan die ikiba nawe. Emery Brown. En koseka kilin goekiba nam David. Die Aixabisan goekwenjene. Udliwano-ndlebe warekodwan goed 2021 kwi, ten Nevshimists podcast. 26. Nchailelo. Sonkesise lalwa lexisa nasishilo. Emfa kukisebenza kena nokifundiswa nyengesidanga.
Welcome to the New Chemist podcast. We're glad you're listening. Feel free to download this podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Here on the New Chemist, we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. We're happy you're tuning in. My guest today is Dr. Emery Brown. Thanks for joining me today. It is so good to hear from you. Just briefly, I'll inform my audience about you. Dr. Emery Brown is the Edward Hood Professor of Medical Engineering and Computational Neuroscience at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Warren M. Zapple Professor of Anesthesia at Harvard Medical School, and a practicing anesthesiologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Brown received his BA, magna cum laude, in Applied Mathematics from Harvard College, his MA and his PhD in Statistics from Harvard University, and his MD magna cum laude from Harvard Medical School. Dr. Brown is an anesthesiologist statistician whose experimental research has made important contributions towards understanding the neuroscience of how anesthetics act in the brain to create the states of general anesthesia. In his statistics research, he has developed signal processing algorithms to solve important data analysis challenges in neuroscience. His research has been featured on National Public Radio, in Scientific American, Technology Review, the New York Times, and in TED Mid 2014. He serves as the director of the Harvard MIT Health Sciences and Technology Program, the associate director of the Institute for Medical Engineering and Science at MIT, an investigator at the Picower Center for Learning and Memory, Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences at MIT. He's a fellow of the Institute of Mathematical Statistics, a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, a member of the National Academy of Engineering, a member of the National Academy of Sciences, and a member of the National Academy of Medicine. In 2007, he was given the NIH Director's Pioneer Award. He's also a member of the Association of University Anesthesiologists. These are just a few of his accomplishments. A very distinguished scientist. Please welcome Dr. Emery Brown. Chemistry field highlights. Femtochemistry. So surveying the literature and looking at the work of Yoshitaka Tanamura, Koichi Yamashita, and Philip A. Anfinrud, we embark on a new discussion, femtochemistry. In short, a key feature of chemistry is the hemolysis or breaking or the formation of bonds, which some consider to be theoretical constructs in some instances. A key feature of the elementary steps of bond making and breaking are molecular vibrations, which occur approximately at the 10 femtosecond scale. So with this view in mind, ultra-fast processes are or is a phrase that can definitely describe chemical reactions and has been umbrellaed or covered or falls under the term femtochemistry.
Thanks, Dr. Brown, for joining me today. It's so good to have a distinguished scientist such as you on this podcast. So, Dr. Brown, what have been your longstanding interests in the field of science? Can you just discuss some of those?
Well, I think they varied over time. I think that probably my strongest interest in science began in college when I got interested in statistics. So being a statistician, developing statistical methods and algorithms that people could really use to analyze data became an early interest of mine. And that's something which I pursued, throughout my career. First working on studying outcomes from surgery as an undergraduate, then later studying circadian rhythms during my PhD work.
Okay.
After that, looking at developing algorithms in general for neuroscience data analysis, for looking at neural spike trains, for looking at EEG, LF, local field potentials, and these sorts of things.
Okay.
And then from there, my interest developed into trying to understand anesthesia. So I'd say those are probably the principal focus areas. So statistics, and then statistics applied to neuroscience, and then anesthesiology, the mechanism of general anesthesia.
So I think by any standard of measurement, or most standards of measurement, most people would say you have been a successful academician. You have achieved your PhD from Harvard, your MD from Harvard, MA from Harvard, BA from Harvard. You've won numerous prizes. You're part of many societies: the National Academy of Inventors, National Academy of Science, the National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Medicine. So how do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general? How are you doing that?
And so when you say the bigger picture, you're referring to
academically and also personally. How do you maintain a view of the bigger picture in terms of like the overarching goals that you have set, your mission statement, your vision for your life?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've tried to do is try to work on an important question.
Okay.
And what you find out with important questions is you can't solve them in 5 minutes. So that necessarily creates like a long trajectory. So for example, the problem of thinking on how does anesthesia work, and that's something which has been a question for now coming near 175 years. And so picking part of that and going after it, it's something which is going to be, it's a challenging question. And if you're able to solve it, it's going to have broad implications, not only for taking care of patients, but also for neuroscience in general and science in general. So that's the sort of things I've tried to work on, like picking important questions. So as another illustration, and thinking about circadian rhythms are everywhere. They control our daily function. So the more we're able to accurately quantify how their properties, again, it has broad implications. So I guess the 2-sentence summary would be picking important questions and pursuing those important questions.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good. So in what specific ways for the layman have you been adaptive and creative in the field of science? What specific ways? I know you work with anesthesia. I know you've been a statistician. What specific ways have you added your flair to those fields?
Well, I think that if we start with like the circadian rhythms, I think right there was the main thing that I did was in looking at the data that were being recorded at those times, like looking at core temperature rhythms to track the circadian system in patients or in study subjects. I worked to give an accurate description of those oscillations. Okay. So trying to make the model capture the structure and the data as accurately as possible, and using what we call harmonic regression techniques to do that. But then not just stopping there, but developing a full inference framework. So you could measure the aspects of the rhythm, say the period, the amplitude, and then from there be able to make statements of uncertainty about, how confident we were about the characterizations that we came up with.
Wow. So
that allows you to have an inference framework. And then going on to some of the other work, like looking at neuroscience data, the same idea in principle, but there's a key concept there that I was able to take advantage of and use, and I've continued to use throughout my career, and that is neuroscience data, because you're recording from the brain and the central nervous system, is dynamic. It changes over time. And you need statistical methods that also capture those changes over time for it to be accurate. And so those were things that I was practiced in, that I learned as part of my PhD training. So whereas most of the methods that were being used are static, and so then it becomes like a kludge to really use them. So by starting from a framework where I already had methods that were dynamic, that capture phenomena that change over time, I was able to develop more accurate descriptions of those sorts of data as well. So in other words, really understanding the properties of the data, that really what the essential elements of the problem are. I think that's something which I tried to focus on, and that's yielded me some measure of success to date.
Yeah, I would say so too. It did. So how have you sort of found the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? I think a lot of people aim or aspire to be at institutions such as Harvard and other institutions as well. So how do you know that was the right environment for you to thrive in scientifically and intellectually?
Well, I can't say that I knew it. I mean, I think I was just like any other student starting off at, like Harvard, really in many respects impressed by what the institution had to offer.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I was there, then saying, well, I really have to take advantage of this. And I remember specifically that when I was a junior and I was thinking about what I wanted to do for my research for senior thesis, Ken Wachter, who was a professor in the statistics department at the time, said, well, since you're thinking about going to medical school, you should probably write a thesis, an undergraduate thesis on a medical topic. And he suggested I go and talk with Professor Fred Mosteller about that particular issue, and work developing a research project with him, because he was a statistician who was working on studying outcomes from surgery. Okay. And that this would be a good idea for me to join a project like that. So that's what I did. Mm-hmm. So I guess the key thing was realizing that what sort of opportunities were there at Harvard, and then taking advantage of them, because you could certainly be there and not take advantage of opportunities that were there. That's true. I think one of the real things that I think it was the case at the time, I think it still continues to be the case, the opportunity to write a senior thesis with, a leading scholar in an area is something which, was amazingly beneficial for me for the long term. Mm-hmm. It got to watch up close and personal how, one of the top statisticians in the world did research. I got to see, how he thought, how he interacted with, other scientists, other physicians, with physicians, and it was very helpful for me to think about the sort of scientist, and in my case also a physician, that I wanted to be, and the way I'd like to be able to do research. And being very specific, one thing about Professor Mosteller was that he could work with anybody. He could work with the best statisticians, the top physicians, graduate students, postdocs, but he could also work with undergraduates like me. And so having, just basically seeing that, and I can honestly say that's something I've tried to emulate.
Oh, wow. That's good. That's definitely good. So, you speak about your desire to attend medical school in your junior year. So how did you delineate or decide between MD, PhD, or MD? Because I think that's a challenge that a lot of people encounter. How did you differentiate whether you want to choose MD, PhD, or MD?
Well, I think what happened is I knew when I came to college that I wanted to go to medical school. That was for sure. Okay. And I can't remember exactly whether it was in my sophomore year or earlier that I decided I wanted to do a PhD also. Okay. And once I really fell in love with statistics, which was between sophomore and junior year, I decided I wanted to do my PhD in statistics because I just I really liked statistics. It was just very powerful paradigm, very powerful framework, was and still is. And I just wanted to master that. And I thought that, but I also wanted to be a physician. And I thought, as opposed to just compromising and doing one or the other, why not do both? And that was how I just made the decision, which was a fairly avant-garde idea at the time, because when I entered the Harvard MD PhD program, nobody had done a PhD in statistics before. That was a rather new idea. There's a new idea there, but also in other programs in the country, because it was people looked at me with a lot of surprise when I said that's what I wanted to do my PhD in. But it was very clear to me that medicine was a field that had a lot of uncertainty, a lot of data, and even more now. And having people who are formally trained in how to quantify that uncertainty and make decisions on uncertainty just seemed like a natural path, and that's what I just decided to do.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, given all your responsibilities and accomplishments, Dr. Brown, how do you maintain a balanced life, or how do you strive to maintain balance?
Well, it's I think family is first. There's no question about that. Yeah. And the accomplishments are basically fun, and they have no luster if your family isn't well taken care of and your family isn't happy. And so, we spend a lot of time, on, downtime on the weekends, vacationing, during the summer, spring, when the kids were younger, sort of making sure we took, vacations during the 4 seasons. And, my wife, like me, likes to travel. So and very often if I have trips to various places to give lectures, we turn them into sort of family outings also.
Okay.
So by doing that, it's made it possible to, pursue activities that are relevant to my career, but also to make sure that, I'm not losing sight of my family.
Yeah, that's good. Priorities, having priorities. I've heard that in several interviews that having priorities that they do complement to maintaining balance. So what would you attribute to your success as a pioneer in the field, Dr. Brown? What would you attribute, what characteristic, what was it your upbringing as a child? Was it your time at Harvard? Or was it your belief system, your perspective on life? What would you say has complements your success as a pioneer in the field? Will it be mentorship?
I think that my parents and my family deserve tremendous credit for, sort of setting me on the right track. And so, for example, both of my parents were teachers. They felt that education was very important.
Okay.
Anytime I wanted to do something or pursue something, they were always behind me. And then, my brothers were always very, very good in school also.
Okay.
And so people would always say, well, you're going to be as good as your brother, sort of things. That also created a certain amount of incentive. But not only my brothers, but my cousins too. They were also really very good in school. And so in other words, there were a number of sort of role models around, which I don't think we use that term then. We didn't think of them that way, but there were people you wanted to be like. So now we would call them role models, right?
Okay.
But one of my cousins, Robert Brown, who went to, Carnegie Mellon, was a star basketball player, honor student, and he was always sitting around reading books, during the summer. I mean, that's the image that I had of him. Or one of my cousins, who was, what was when we were kids, was teaching us lines from HMS Pinafore, that sort of thing.
Wow.
And so the idea, so being smart was cool. Essentially, that was I think I really remember that idea. And like the smarter you were in this environment around our family, kind of like the cooler you were.
Wow.
So and so I think that kind of instilled this in me. Or for example, like my oldest brother was a very good writer, and my middle brother was a physicist.
Wow.
Or just a retired physicist now. So again, it didn't seem like that at the time, but they were implicitly setting bars, for me to try to jump over just by what they were doing, by example. So I think those are the origins. And then realizing once you had opportunities, you took advantage of them.
Yeah.
And then you have some serendipity. You have some people who realize that you have potential, and they try to help you realize it. Like my language teacher at Exeter, Mr. Baggio, who spoke like 5 languages. And so I wanted to be like Mr. Baggio, try to be as proficient in as many languages as he was. Yeah. Or for example, when I was an undergraduate at Harvard, one of the anesthesiologists there, Dr. Jack McPeak, took an interest in me. He was one of my thesis advisors. And he's the first person who took me to the operating room. And then, several years later, when I decided to go into anesthesiology, I was able to turn to him and get advice. And he helped me, arrange to take, a rotation in anesthesiology, and decided that that's what I wanted to go into. So in addition to, so it's a number of things. It's not just basically like any one thing.
That's fair.
But, so I'd say some early on, some folks that I really looked up to. Later on, some folks who realizing and acknowledging my potential, who helped me out. And I was very grateful for that.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, so you spoke, and from my understanding, it seems like you grew up in a culture of excellence. Of course, I'm sure there were things that could have been improved on, but you said you grew up in an environment where it seems like everyone was pursuing excellence. What would you say? Would you say it was your parents or their brothers and sisters that contributed to that?
Oh yeah, yeah. For example, yeah, like so my mother's family grew up in Pittsburgh, and my mother and her older sister. So that my mother was one of 7 children,
Okay.
and so she was the second oldest, and her sister was extremely smart. You know,
Oh, okay.
her older sister. My mother's extremely smart. She graduated from high school when she was 16.
Wow.
I remember my uncle, who was the next one in line, the third one, was saying to me, he says, you know, your mother and Anna and your Aunt Anita made it hard for me because they had done so well in school. I had to do well too, you know, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And, you know, on the other hand, my father was very industrious. I mean, he was someone who was orphaned. He was 14. He and his brother had lost both his parents. They were raised by their grandfather.
Wow.
But they had someone who, his grandfather, my great grandfather, was this amazing guy. He was a minister, but he was also a gentleman farmer.
Okay.
And he owned this very large parcel of land, you know, there in Florida, where I grew up, which we still own today.
Okay.
And that he was an amazingly industrious person. And I know that rubbed off on my father because my father was always doing stuff, both for the family, but also for the community. He was very committed to his, you know, his community. So I think that, in fact, I know that, you know, I inherited that perspective, you know, those goals, those sorts of, the sort of can-do attitude that my father, you know, always had. And I'll just give you one example. Like,
Okay, I'm here to listen.
At the time, my father's grandfather wanted him to move back to Florida because after he got married, they lived in New York and in Pittsburgh. And he wanted him to move back because he wanted somebody living on their property. So my father decided to build a house. So this was in about 1957, 1958.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, my father couldn't get a loan from the bank to build a house. And as we know, one of the most important things entering into the American dream is to be able to build a house and, you know, lay down roots, right?
Yes, I agree.
So I didn't know this until many years later. He actually borrowed money from an auto body shop to build a house. He couldn't get a loan from the bank.
Wow.
And I remember when we paid off the note, I don't know, I must have been about 10 or 11 at the time. And I didn't quite understand everything, you know, that was going on, but I subsequently figured out what had happened. But the thing is that because the conventional means that most, you know, Americans would have used to build a house, getting a loan from the bank and doing that, wasn't available to him, he had to come up with another strategy that would work. And he did it. And so I think about that now. I mean, think about if he'd not been able to do that. You know, where would I be now if he hadn't done that? And so, but then taking from that, realizing that if people put obstacles in your way, you have to outthink them.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've seen myself do that, like on a number of occasions. But I mean, but that was probably one of the most, you know, concrete examples because the people at the bank couldn't believe that an African American would want to build like a real house, you know, like a solid, you know, 3-bedroom, you know, 2.5 bathroom, you know, living room, Florida room, you know, outside porch, you know, house. They figured we'd just have some idea of like a little shanty or something like that in mind, but that was far from what my father had imagined because he had studied industrial arts in college, so he knew how to build things. And with the help of his brother and his uncles, they actually built the house.
Wow. Wow, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm learning a lot, Dr. Brown. So, how have you maintained vision and teamwork in your environment, in your lab, in your workspace in Mass General? How do you maintain vision and teamwork? How do you make sure that everyone's collaborating and seeing the big picture and trying to answer those important questions that you mentioned?
I think there are two things. I think one, you look for cool problems, and you get people excited about cool problems. I think that's the starting point. And then, you know, you you let people loose and let them use their creativity to start working on them. You guide them.
Mm-hmm.
But at least this is what I like to do. I like to guide people to help them solve problems and then pitch in, when they, need my help, because it allows them to develop their creative capacities and bring them to bear on a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's probably the most important thing, and also making it fun. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in many regards now I'm more a cheerleader than anything else. I'm not so much the person like doing the work. I'm just there, rah rah rah,
Yeah.
keeping them going and offering suggestions and making sure people aren't getting stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably the main thing that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I can honestly say it's fun. It's fun working with. It's watching people who are many years my junior master concepts that I didn't master until I was like maybe 20 years older than they were. Like, wow, they know this stuff already. You can only imagine what they can do or what they'll be able to do, going on into the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so just sitting there marveling at that and trying to facilitate that is a real pleasure. And I try to keep that going on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, wow. So as we start to wrap up, you mentioned how being smart was cool. I can be wrong with this. However, I'm not sure if that's the prevailing message in many instances or in many circles. So what would you say could complement a change in that dynamic? Where it's not just the athletic environments that have a lot of attraction to them for young people, but academic environments as well. How can we make that a more prevailing message? That intellectual curiosity and intellectual development is worth the time and effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really have to. I mean, I'm clearly biased because I'm an academic. I'm in science, and I feel strongly that people should know about academics and science and those sorts of things. But I think that I'm indebted to you for taking time to talk to somebody like me to allow me to tell my story,
Oh, wow.
because it's it's more exciting to hear about Jason Tatum having scored 50 points and won the game for the Celtics than
Definitely.
I get to hear about what I'm doing. So and that's just the realities of it.
That's true.
But however, being able to, like, for example, I have three after my father, I have like three additional heroes in mathematics. One is Benjamin Banneker, the black mathematician who laid out DC. He's the first person to really characterize the cycles of the circadia, the insects which come out every 17 years. So he was really, and he did this over something like 4 or 5 cycles. So he started when he was 17.
Okay.
And so he was probably the country's first data scientist when you think about it. Or another person is Katherine Johnson. When I learned about her, I was just like blown away. Basically the woman mathematician, African-American woman mathematician, who worked out the flight trajectories for the early Mercury and I think also Gemini space missions. I mean, just think about it. She did the calculations by hand.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that's just like unreal. And the third person who actually had the good fortune to meet is David Blackwell. He was African-American professor at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, professor of statistics. I mean, just like an amazing mind, soft-spoken, just totally respected because he was just so brilliant. First African-American elected to the National Academy of Sciences in 1964. So more than 100 years after the academy was actually set up, the first African-American was elected. It was he. So, I think about, people like that, and I'm saying, gosh, if I can be anything like those guys, so, I clearly the accomplishments of LeBron James or Magic Johnson are the things that are often talked about. But like in my realm, I see somebody like these people, and they're my heroes, and those are the people I aspire to be like.
Yeah, that's good. So as we conclude, do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue the field you are currently working in? So budding scientists. What advice would you give to those wanting to pursue the field you are currently working in, whether it be statistics or medicine or just a PhD in general?
I think they try to get involved and gain experience early.
Okay.
I can tell you, I get letters almost every day from students asking to come and work in my group.
Okay.
Literally, and of different ages, all the way from junior high school, up through, high school, college, postdocs. And
Okay.
I'm amazed at what some of these students have told me they already know.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are from the United States, some are not. They're from outside, from basically, effectively the four corners of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but realizing that that's what people do and not being bashful about doing that. And if the first time you write somebody, you don't hear from them, no big deal. Keep going. If you want it,
Yep.
go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're trying to create, because all you need is one opportunity to sort of get your foot in the door. And
Mm-hmm.
once you have that and you realize, and the other opportunities will open up.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
you
agree.
can see that this is something that students from a number of different backgrounds are actually doing now. I think that students in general, particularly perhaps, underrepresented minority students,
Mm-hmm.
feel free to take the same approach.
I agree. Completely agree. So, what has been some of the most beneficial advice you have received, Dr. Brown? As we conclude, what is the most beneficial advice or a piece of the beneficial advice that you received either from your parents, as you mentioned, they were very industrious and intelligent, um, even from your colleagues or professors? What has been some of the most beneficial advice that you have received?
I,
Doesn't
I,
whatever
I,
works.
the most, I think a number of things. I think, just in watching like my parents, just like working hard and also, but then encouraging intellectual pursuits,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I certainly have picked up on that and tried to amplify that. I just remember my mother saying at one point, like I told you, she was extremely smart.
Mm-hmm.
And, she was, it was very clear she lived vicariously through us, the things that we
Mm-hmm.
were able to accomplish, not only me, but my brothers as well.
Mm-hmm.
And one point in sort of a more candid moment, she said, if I had opportunities, I'm sure I could have been, a lot more than I am now.
Yeah, I've heard that same sentiment from
And
relatives
that,
as well.
that kind of stuck with me and just sort of said, well, I have an obligation to try to be as successful as I possibly can because my mother made it possible for me to get to where I am now.
Mm-hmm.
And she sacrificed a lot to be where she was. And I should, I should basically do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then a complimentary idea. I just remember my uncle saying once that, it never hurts to be nice.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can help somebody, why not? Just
I know, right?
just just that simple, not deep, but just, and
Yeah.
it can take on many forms. It can just be meeting someone on the street to helping someone with their career. So
Mm-hmm.
I think somewhere in there is some of the best advice I've received. There are
Yeah.
probably other things, but they don't come to mind right now.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, Dr. Brown, thank you so much for joining me today. It was good to have you on.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Dave. I really appreciate it.
Chemistry conceptual developments. So today we're going to be introducing or talking about regiochemistry principles. So key things you want to keep in mind are you want to understand the fundamentals of regiochemistry, understand Markovnikov's rule and the anti-Markovnikov's rule, and we want to try and understand Zaitsev's and Hoffman's rule. So regiochemistry principles and other ideas. Regiochemistry comes from the Latin word regionum, meaning direction. Regiochemistry describes the principles involved in the directionality or position and placement of reactants to form products. Regiochemistry is very important. We normally hear in advanced or high-level discussions of things being regioselective or regiodivergent or it's used a lot. So the reagent used can cause a specific regiochemical result or result in the opposite of what would normally occur. Markovnikov's rule. Markovnikov's rule, put simply, is he who has more gets more. Markovnikov's rule in the addition of a halide to an unsymmetrical alkene Typically, in the addition of a halide to an unsymmetrical alkene, the hydrogen goes to the carbon with the greatest number of hydrogens, and the halide ion goes to the other carbon. In another way, this rule states that the halide adds so as to form the more stable carbocation intermediate. Antimakovnikov. Antimakovnikov is the reverse. He who has more gets less, in which the carbon with the greatest number of hydrogens does not receive the hydrogen, but the most electrophilic portion of the molecule. For example, in hydroboration oxidation in the presence of peroxides, the borohydrate adds the less substituted carbon of the hydrogen, and the hydrogen adds the more substituted carbon. In short, now mechanistically, it may occur slightly, it's a little bit more involved and more detailed, but in short, that's what we're going to say occurs. However, stability comes about because the electron density shifts from the electrophilic borohydride, resulting in it possessing a partially negative charge and the more substituted carbon possessing a partially positive charge. This is indeed stable due to the electron density donating capacity of the alkyl group, S character, and orbital overlap of the alkynyl carbon. The alkynyl group with the alkyl or electron donating substituent provides stability. Zaitsev's rule. Zaitsev's rule is a directionality principle in which the most substituted alkene is favored to the use of a small base, such as ethoxide. Zaitsev's rule is very significant and aids in predicting products and elimination reactions. Hoffman's rule. Hoffman's rule is another directionality principle in which the less substituted alkene is favored to the use of a huge or large base, such as straight butoxide. Hoffman's rule is also very significant and aids in predicting elimination reactions. Hammond-Leffler postulate. The Hammond-Leffler postulate essentially states that the product resembles the molecular arrangement of the transition state. In simpler terms, the view on the potential energy hill continues in some ways as you follow through the potential energy journey. So progressing in that direction, we're going to talk about some new stuff today. Again, surveying the literature and looking at the work of Shantanu Roy, Stefan Godeka, and Vladimir Hellman, we embark on the journey of the Bell-Evans-Polanyi principle. So typically, or in short, the Bell-Evans-Polanyi principle is valid for a chemical reaction that proceeds along the reaction coordinate over the transition state. And that concept is extended to molecular dynamics trajectories that in general do not cross the dividing surface between the initial and final local minima at the exact transition state. It's very important and it has a lot of implications. It's a conceptual tool in physical chemistry, and we have come to understand that this principle can be used to improve the efficiency of existing molecular dynamics-based methods by tuning the energy of these molecular dynamic trajectories. Along with that, we'll be discussing the Dimroth principle, or Dimroth rearrangements. These are frequently encountered in heteroaromatic chemistry and was first recognized in the triazole series. This term was coined in 1963 as a convenient way of referring to the isomerization proceeding by ring fission and subsequent recyclization, whereby a ring nitrogen and its attached substituent exchange place with an amino group in a position alpha to it. Moving right along, we'll discuss a mechanistic highlight. Today we'll be talking about the Suzuki cross-coupling reaction. The Suzuki cross-coupling, or the Suzuki-Miura cross-coupling, is a type of palladium catalyzed cross-coupling reaction. CC bond formation using aryl halides and organoboronic acids. It is one of the most important reactions in synthetic organic and medicinal chemistry. There are two suggested pathways. The oxo-palladium pathway is the preferred mechanism, as some may say, and the boronic pathway is another description of what occurs. Of course, these occur through catalytic cycles, and this reaction was likely first described around 1979. In 2010, Akira Suzuki, jointly with Richard F. Heck and Ichi Negishi, received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the development of palladium catalyzed cross-coupling reactions. Wrapping up the highlight section, we'll talk about Nobel highlights. So Svante Arrhenius. Svante Arrhenius was born on February 19, 1859, near Uppsala, Sweden. He received the Nobel Prize on December 10, 1903, in recognition of his theory of electrolytic dissociation. His father, Svante Gustav Arrhenius, held a position at the University of Uppsala. His uncle, Johan Arrhenius, was a botanist, writer, and a longtime secretary of the Swedish Agricultural Academy in Stockholm. Svante Arrhenius was an outstanding student in school. He learned reading and arithmetic at a very early age, and in his secondary school excelled particularly in mathematics and physics. His physics teacher was M. Flederis, author of the most popular contemporary Swedish secondary school physics textbook. His university degrees were all from the University of Uppsala. Definitely a chemist that worked hard. This ends the session of highlights for this podcast episode. Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I. Okay, Dr. Langer, thank you so much for joining me today. It is good to have you here.
My pleasure.
Yes. So what has been some of the most beneficial advice you have received?
Well, I would say that, it's not so much advice as just a role model. Judah Folkman was my postdoctoral advisor, and he was the kind of person that believed anything was possible. I don't know if he used those words, but he lived that, and so I think that thinking that anything is possible, and I think recognizing when you think that way, you're going to often get criticism. There's going to be a lot of roadblocks, and then not giving up. And I think, so I mean, he never said it quite that way, but that's kind of what I learned from him as a mentor, to dream big dreams and never give up.
Oh, wow. That's very good. It's very good. Persistence is important. So do you have any advice for those wanting to pursue the field you are currently working in?
Well, what I just said is part of the advice. I
Okay.
think it's important to do things that are transformative and not incremental, but
Okay.
recognizing that if you do that, you will run into roadblocks and you will fail sometimes. So, so the important thing is, as you just said, is persistence. Persistence is very important.
Yeah, that's true. Dr. Langer, I listened to several of your interviews, and one of the things that stands out to me is that your academic path, your academic journey was not easy. You encountered some challenges, and I think it's very commendable that you were able to persist and be successful amidst those challenges. So, in line with your major, why did you choose chemical engineering as a field to major in?
Yeah, I would like to tell you that it was really well thought out, but I can't say that. Initially, when I was in high school, my dad and my guidance counselor said, well, you're good in science and math, so you should become an engineer. So I became an engineer. And then when I was at Cornell as an undergraduate, the course I liked the best and the one I was best at was chemistry. So I became a chemical engineer.
Okay. Oh, wow. Wow. So
I'm glad I did. I think it's been a great profession.
Okay, yeah, I would say so too. So in terms of your doctoral studies,
is it along the same lines that you chose chemical engineering to do your doctoral studies in, or are those things the deciding factors, the things that affected you in your undergraduate years?
Well, so I for a long time, I didn't have a very clear idea of what I wanted to do. As an undergraduate, like I say, I majored in chemical engineering for the reasons that I said. As a graduate student, in a way, it was just a continuation of that. I still was kind of searching for something I wanted to do. And when I was a graduate student, I got involved in a lot of other things too, like helping start a school for poor high school students and things like that. And developing new chemistry and math curricula. And so it wasn't until my postdoctoral work that I really sort of found a research direction, and that was by being in the hospital. I worked in Children's Hospital as a postdoc, and I was really the only engineer there. And as I mentioned, the man I work with, Judah Folkman, he was a great role model, and I started to think about how I could solve medical problems with my chemical engineering background.
Okay, yeah, that's very good. So you mentioned how you started the school, and I remember hearing about the school in a previous interview. So my question to you is, why and how did you go about starting that school?
Well, actually, so my interest in teaching started when I was at Cornell because I was a teaching assistant, and I really loved that. And so when I came to Boston the next year and Cambridge to join MIT as a student, graduate student, I got involved in doing some tutoring activities in Roxbury and Cambridge. And so there were some people, Peter Haggerty, Neil Didrikson, Paula Didrikson, they were interested in starting this school for working class children, for kids. And they had heard about me, so they asked would I help on developing the math and science programs. And I thought this sounded like a very worthwhile thing, so I did.
Oh, that's very good. So how have you maintained vision and teamwork in your environment? How have you maintained those things in your work environment, in your lab? How do you maintain those things?
Well, I guess there are different things. So vision, I try to encourage everybody in the lab to think big and to dream big dreams and to do things that can hopefully have a big effect on the health and well-being of the world. And so, in terms of teamwork, and I encourage everybody to work together. We have a lot of people. We have over 100 people in the lab, but I try to hire, this may sound almost silly, but I try to hire very nice people who get along with each other, but who also really want to make a difference in the world. And so that's what I've tried to do repeatedly. So yeah. They've been great. The people we've had in our lab have been outstanding.
Yeah, that's very true. So in terms of your success, I think by any standard of measurement, international, national, I think people can all agree that you have been successful as a pioneer in the field. So what would you say has complemented the most to your success? Would it be mentoring? Would it be networking? Would it be your approach to studying or learning or teaching? What would you say has been the main driver or impetus in which you have been successful?
Well, I think to the extent that I have been successful, and that may be debatable, but to the extent that I have, I really think it's been the people. I've had wonderful, wonderful people working in the lab, and they've been great. I like to think that they feel like I've treated them well and that I've encouraged them to live their dreams. But really it's having just tremendous people. MIT's been a great place, and we've just had a tremendous number of very, very good students and postdocs in the lab. And, by any measures, I think 19 are now in the National Academy of Engineering. I think 16 in the National Academy of Medicine, and they've won all kinds of awards, started companies. They've been very, very successful. So to me, it's been them.
Yeah, it's true. People are important, very important. So given all your responsibilities and accomplishments, how do you strive to maintain a balanced life?
Well, my wife is very good at making sure I do. When my children were little, she told me, that if I wasn't traveling and that I shouldn't, that I needed to be home by 7 every night to spend time with the kids. And when I traveled, I mean, of course, right now I'm not traveling, but when I did travel, certainly when the children were young, I mean, you know, or even at home, I would never be gone for very long. You know, I kind of learned that was important to them. So like just to give an example, 5 years in a row, I had to go to Israel for something like a lecture, an award, or a degree, honorary degree. And all those 5 times in a row, 5 different years, I didn't use a hotel. You know, I just flew over, I spent part of the day there, and then I flew right back.
Wow.
They have a 1 a.m. flight from Tel Aviv to New York, so I was able to do that. But anyhow, so I never would be gone for very long.
Okay, wow, yeah, family is a very important thing, and so you would say your family is the basis on which you've been able to keep a balanced life.
Well, that, and my wife has been very good, Laura. She tells me what she thinks. So if I did something, if I was probably spending too much time doing other things, she would certainly let me know.
Okay, that's good. So, in terms of your impactful ideas, what would you say have been your most impactful and effective ideas to date?
Well, I think there's been 3 or 4 areas. It's hard to, you know, that have been important, I guess. One has been the work we did with Judah Folkman on isolating the first angiogenesis inhibitors, the first blood vessel inhibitors, you know, and that's led because of work that others had done after that at companies and so forth to many new drugs that would be useful in treating cancer and eye diseases. The second is probably the work on new materials and controlled drug delivery, which also, and you know, that includes nanotechnology, and that's also led to, you know, quite a number of products by different groups again. And finally would be the idea of with Jay Vacanti of tissue engineering, you know, where you could combine materials and cells and, you know, make new tissues and organs, whether that be a organ on a chip or a new tissue in the body like artificial skin.
Okay. So in terms of you finding and seeking the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually, how did you go about finding that? What was your guide, or what was your rubric or basis on which you found that environment? I take it was at MIT, but how did you find that?
Yeah, well, I mean, so there are different ways. I mean, I really, I suppose the experience I had at Children's Hospital, that was really key. And then MIT, I mean, you know, that was, I guess, good luck. You know, that they hired me and, you know, things worked out there. Ultimately, though, you create your own environment. Really, when you run a lab, it's the, you know, it's the environment you create for others, you know, that ends up making a difference.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I've heard other people say that as well. It's not so much about the environment being there already, but you can complement to creating that environment for yourself.
I think that's key. Yes, I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah, in which you're able to thrive scientifically and intellectually. I heard someone say you can almost somewhat bend the environment to your will, or complement it, change it.
Well, you can create, if you have a big effect on the environment by the way you treat people and the way you act as a role model or lack thereof.
That's true. That's very true. Your actions do count. So, in terms of you maintaining view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general, how have you done that? When you face challenges or obstacles, how have you maintained a view of the bigger picture that kept you going and that kept you persistent? How did you do that?
Well, I guess that's just me. You know, I'm a very stubborn person. If I believe in something, I just keep trying and trying. I don't give up easily. If I feel something can do some good, if I feel that we've made a finding that's important, you know, I'll do the best I can.
Okay, yeah, that's very good. So, Dr. Langer, my career path, I'll just speak on my career path thus far. I started off in engineering at Georgia Tech, and some things happened, and I transitioned to another institute, and I switched my major to biochemistry. So I changed path because also my interest changed as well. So my question to you is, for those in the field of engineering, what would be some of your advice, or what would be the key things that you did that complemented to you being able to transition to eventually a doctoral program in engineering and eventually to serve as a pioneer in the field? What were some of the key things that you did in your time as an undergraduate and as a graduate student?
Yeah, well, I think as an undergraduate, I feel you really want to learn the fundamentals. You want to learn the fundamentals, and you want to really do well in class. I mean, that should be your highest priority. I mean, I wouldn't do research or other things until I knew I could do well in class, so to speak. As a graduate student, I think then, you also want to do the same thing, continue learning the fundamentals well, but then you really want to pick a research project and a research advisor if you're getting a PhD or even a master's degree, who's really a good mentor. And what does that mean? I mean, hopefully that they treat you well and that they put you in an environment or have you in an environment where you can learn from them and from others.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So I think most of us can agree that this time has been somewhat challenging for a lot of people due to the pandemic. And a lot of people have encountered obstacles or challenges. So what has kept you optimistic during this time, during this pandemic? What has kept
Well,
you optimistic?
two things. One of the things I've been doing is I've been spending a lot of time trying to fight this pandemic. One of the companies I helped start's Moderna. Moderna has been one of the leading companies in terms of creating the COVID vaccine. So they're now in what's called phase 3 trials for doing it. And actually, almost every one of the companies that's doing an RNA vaccine, and those are the leading ones in terms of moving forward in the clinic, uses nanoparticles, which is an area to deliver the RNA. And, so that's an area that we've done a lot on. And we're also doing work in the lab on vaccines, with masks, creating new masks, creating new ventilators, creating split ventilators, working on nasal sprays that might be able to combat it, working on new blood tests. So we've been very active in terms of really trying to hopefully make a difference in treating COVID. In addition to, even though research slowed down on other things because of the rules at the universities, I think that we continue that research too. And we're working a lot with the Gates Foundation on things that can help the developing world and just other things that I hope will be important to the world at some point. And again, I believe in all these things, so we're not going to stop, but all that is what we've tried to do.
So two more questions. In terms of your work with the COVID-19 pandemic, in terms of all these things you're designing and engineering, have you seen the impact, or is it still in the works? Have you started to see impact from your work thus far?
I'd say the answer to that is we've seen some impact. I mean, so what can I say? The fact that, some of the things that we did actually now over 45 years ago, creating, small particles that could deliver nucleic acids. Like I say, that's being used by Moderna, Pfizer, many companies. Again, lots of other people contributed too, but we did that early. We also developed other kinds of nanoparticles. And again, a lot of it's being done by our students in some of these places. So I think that the vaccines, they haven't made an impact yet, but other than the people that have been treated by it, but that seems to me the nation's biggest hope, the world's biggest hope, is the vaccines. Other things we've done have had an impact. We helped make new masks, and several million of those have already been used by people. And I think they're better masks. And some of the others are in the works, but are in clinical trials, and they've moved very fast. So I think that we've been able to make some impact on patients already, and hopefully more.
Okay. So, Dr. Langer, you mentioned, just going back, you mentioned how you said you're somewhat stubborn and you're persistent. Is this something that was taught you in your upbringing, or is it something you developed over time in academic settings?
I think it's something that I just was born that way. You know, I think I've always been
Okay.
stubborn. I'm sure my
Okay.
parents thought that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, Dr. Langer, it was so good to have you on today. I really appreciate you taking this time to chat with me and for us to discuss your career path and how you're currently making a difference and how you have how you made a substantial difference in chemical engineering and biomolecular engineering fields. So thank you again for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and good luck.